2018 Victorian election have now formally closed.
4 million votes will now be counted, and throughout the course of this evening, a winner will emerge. I'm Tamara O'Dine.
And I'm Michael Rowland. Welcome to Victoria Votes. Well, after a month of frenetic campaigning, the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews and opposition leader Matthew Guy can do nothing now but simply wait.
We are less than 30 minutes away now from getting the first figures for the night, and you'll get them when we do. And the person to take you through them is the ABC's election analyst, Anthony Green. Anthony, hello. Tell us about where we're starting from tonight.
Well, the starting point is the Legislative Assembly, the lower house of the Victorian Parliament. If we look at this, let's set up the chamber here and we'll fill in the seats as they were in the old Parliament or as they were from the last election, the existing Parliament. The numbers need some explaining. The Labor Party's on 46. They won 47 seats at the last election. We've excluded Northcote, which was won by the Greens, and took them to 3. So our starting position is Labor 46, Greens others, Liberals 30, Nationals 8. Some people have said 7. We've included Morwell as a national held seat. If Russell North wins it, recontesting as an independent, then that will be a gain by him. But we've started off by classifying that as a national held seat. So there's 38 seats on the coalition sides, and they need 7 seats to win government. The Labor Party needs to avoid a net loss of 2 seats. The battle will clear these numbers out now, and that's the battleground as it starts tonight. There's also the upper house, 40 seats in the upper house chamber, but the main thing we'll be watching for in this coverage is the battle for the Legislative Assembly.
Indeed we will, Anthony. Thank you so much. Now, there is a lot to keep an eye on tonight, and to help us do that, from the government, we are welcomed by the Health Minister, Jill Hennessy. Great to see you, Jill.
Lovely to be here.
And from the opposition, a key member of Matthew Guy's team, the Shadow Attorney-General, John Pesutto. Great to see you, John.
Pleasure to be here.
And after 7 o'clock, joining our panel will be the former Labor Premier John Brumby and Victorian Liberal Senator Jane Hume for their expert analysis.
We're also joined by the ABC's state political reporter Richard Willingham.
Good evening.
Richard, g'day.
Good evening.
So, Jill Hennessy, starting with you. You've just come fresh from visiting various polling stations, various electorates. What's the mood out there from your perspective?
Look, I feel cautiously optimistic. I think the reality is none of us know what the outcome of this election's going to be. And whilst through elections, everyone likes to say it's a little too close to call, the reality is that this election will be decided by a handful of votes in a handful of seats. And whilst I think we've run a really optimistic and positive campaign, the fact of the matter is that those ballots are being put out on tables now and furiously starting to be counted. But I am not without hope, and I am usually a bit more of a pessimistic person.
OK, we'll see how that tracks over the course of the night. Now, Richard, you have covered state politics for nearly a decade for both The Age and, of course, the ABC most recently. Take us through where this election will be won and lost tonight.
Well, I think, firstly, the polls suggest that Daniel Andrews is on track to be re-elected, but, of course, as Jill just pointed out, that there's a handful of votes and a handful of seats. So it's going to come down to marginal seats, and I think this is what Labor must do to hold on to government. Now, firstly, it must hold all of the Frankston line and the seat of Cranbourne. It must keep the Greens at bay and at least the seat of Richmond in the inner city. And it also needs to win seats off the Liberal Party. So I think they need to be looking out for places like Bass, Ripon. There's also a chance in Paran and Burwood. Now, for the coalition to win this, they need to win most of the Sandbelt, Cranbourne, Paran, and also find a win elsewhere. So they'll be looking for places like Morwell, Monbulk, perhaps one of the Ballarat seats, as well as maybe Narre Warren. Now, they also can't surrender any seats to Labor, so they'll be watching and hoping they don't surrender Ripon in Western Victoria. And finally, they must hope that there is no independent surge in the bush. The Nationals and some country Liberals will be being challenged tonight by some independents who are well backed by people like Cathy McGowan.
Also on our panel tonight is the Shadow Attorney-General John Pesutto. How are you feeling? How's the day played out for you, John?
Look, the reports I'm getting, Tamara, from our people on the ground is that they've been well received. We've been running a fairly strong grassroots campaign for many months now, and we've had candidates out in the field for a long time, knocking on doors, ringing constituents, ascertaining their most important issues. So we've been continually in contact with voters in a lot of the key seats for a long time. So I am aware of the published polls, but we're also very optimistic that that work will pay off. The big question tonight will be how much.
Do the
But we think
polls
it will-
erode your confidence at all?
No, I think all of us have been around elections long enough to know that we don't ignore them, but you just have to continue working, and the more direct contact you can have with voters, the better.
Thanks, John. Well, at some stage tonight, Daniel Andrews will make his way from his home to Labor's election night headquarters at the Village Green Hotel in Mulgrave. He'll be delivering either a victory or concession speech. Our state political reporter, Stephanie Anderson, is at Labor HQ. She joins us now. So, Steph, what's the mood like within the government tonight?
Well, as you can see, Tam, there's not very much happening here right now. The polls have only just closed. And for that army of volunteers, which has been out trying to convince people to vote for Labor, their time is much better spent at those polling booths trying to convince every last voter to back Labor. But this will be the scene either for their victory celebrations or the commiserations if things go against Labor tonight. The polls have been looking very good for Labor throughout the campaign, but every time the Premier Daniel Andrews has been asked about those numbers, he's been very eager not to seem overconfident. He says that the only vote that matters is the people's. That'll be the true poll, and doesn't want to seem like he's too much of a front runner there. But there is a sense of optimism here. They've all been working very, very hard, and it won't be long now until everybody pours in to either celebrate or commiserate what's happened.
Thanks very much, Steph.
The Liberal Party faithful, meanwhile, gathering in Bulleen tonight, and we're joined now by Ben Knight at the Veneto Club. Ben, g'day. Tell us what the mood like is there.
Oh, it's pretty quiet, Michael. A couple of reasons for that. One is that there simply aren't that many people here at the moment for the same reason as Steph mentioned. They're still out there. So just a handful of staffers and supporters here. The bar isn't even open yet, but I can tell you that as those first handful of people started to walk in, they were not wearing broad grins. Perhaps one of the reasons for that is they looked up on the big screen and saw that exit poll, which 55-45 predicting a Labor Party win. Now, I can tell you Michael Kroger, who we'll hopefully be hearing from in just a moment, is reasonably dismissive of that poll, but I think there's also a bit of an air of realism here this evening, that there's a mountain to climb for the Liberal Party to win government tonight.
Ben, during the campaign, you've reported our Matters of State series on the important issues for Victorian voters at this election. What do you think has motivated voters in the lead up to polling day?
Well, I guess we'll find out tonight. There's really been no shortage of issues, and when you have a look at the issues that the coalition's been campaigning on, they're all real, genuine issues of concern to Victorian voters, not just crime, obviously, which has been a feature, but issues like cost of living, issues like congestion. They're very real, and so I guess if the Liberal campaign is not as successful as they've hoped it'd be, they'll have to look at perhaps why those issues didn't resonate. Now, of course, we're a long way from that at the moment. The counting's barely started, and I can tell you that there are people in this room who are still holding out hope that yes, in fact, the coalition will get up. But look, let's take a bit of a look back, because this campaign's been going on longer than the official 4 weeks, and there was a time when we thought it would be fought on completely different matters. So let's take a look at those.
Just 2 years ago, it was a bitter dispute in Victoria's fire services that was consuming state politics.
The United Firefighters Union wanted more power over the Country Fire Authority, but the CFA volunteers were furious. Now, the Premier Daniel Andrews strongly backed the union, but his Emergency Services Minister Jane Garrett strongly backed the CFA. And in July 2016, she resigned from the Premier's cabinet in protest. If you talk to people inside the fire services, then the issue hasn't gone away, and there's still a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness. But the news cycle moved on to issues like safe schools, voluntary euthanasia and safe injecting rooms.
There were scandals too. Labor was found to have misused electoral staff for campaigning in the 2014 election. Then Labor released secret cabinet papers revealing questionable payouts by opposition leader Matthew Guy from his time as planning minister.
But there was one issue that just kept jumping back into the headlines over and over again, and it's the issue that's dominated Victorian politics for almost a decade: law and order.
It's where the Labor government has been most vulnerable after a wave of highly publicised crimes, particularly by young men of African descent from the outer suburbs of Melbourne. The opposition has been campaigning hard on it almost non-stop.
Make Victoria safe. Vote Liberal.
Labor's response was to go tough on crime as well.
But crime is never out of the news for long. And 2 weeks ago, right here in the centre of Melbourne, it became the #1 story once again.
Especially when it was revealed that the Bourke Street attacker had been out on bail and had had his passport cancelled.
Another huge issue has been Melbourne's massive population growth, and you've seen suburbs like this springing up all over Melbourne's fringes. And of course, when people move in, they want to know pretty much straight away, where's the school? Where's the hospital? Where are the roads? Where's the public transport? But it's actually an issue where Labor might have an advantage over the opposition. Daniel Andrews has been campaigning really hard on his record as a builder, and especially of transport projects like the new Metro tunnel, but also new train lines in the suburbs, Skyrail, removing level crossings. So it's probably no surprise that he actually kicked off the unofficial election campaign with the biggest transport project yet.
The Suburban Rail Loop is a new underground rail network.
Voters are being presented with two competing visions on how to cope with Melbourne's population boom.
Labor promising to build in Melbourne, to make it more livable while the city expands. The opposition, on the other hand, promising things like faster regional rail links to get people into the country, encourage them to live there and take the pressure off the capital. But there is one other potential problem for the Liberals' Matthew Guy in this campaign, and it's one that is really quite beyond his control. Newspoll has shown that a third of Victorians say they're less likely to vote Liberal in the state campaign because of the chaos in Canberra.
And Ben Knight is still with us live from Liberal HQ. And Ben, you've got the party's state president, Michael Kroger, there with you.
Yes, Tam, I do. Michael Kroger, well, you walked into the room this evening. There's not many people in here yet, but when you did walk in, you walked in and saw the results of that exit poll, which showed 55-45. How was that to start the evening?
Well, we don't take much notice of exit polls because they're invariably wrong, and a lot of polls have been wrong. So over the years, we're hoping that is a reoccurrence tonight. Obviously, we're hopeful of victory. At the very worst, we hope for a hung parliament, take a few seats off Labor. But in the end, that's now in the hands of the voters.
It does reflect what the other polls have been saying in the last couple of days. Now, that they, of course, which party is likely to form government, and it will come down to the individual seats. Are you confident that you can get across the line?
Well, our polling in a lot of the marginals has been very good for many, many weeks. And what has happened in the last couple of weeks is people tend to focus on the amount of money Labor is spending. That has tended to increase their vote and reduce ours. Now, what you find is if a government's spending $25 billion, drawing down $25 billion worth of debt, this is not a good way to run a government. So to have a debt-filled binge of expenditure sounds good because you're spending it on infrastructure, but when you haven't got the money, this creates long-term problems for our economy. And if Labor were to win tonight, it's built on the back of this massive binge, which Victorians and our kids will be paying for a long time, long after Daniel Andrews is gone. So they're spending far too much money, and I think as Michael O'Brien described yesterday, pretty recklessly too.
It's probably a bit early in the evening to be reflecting on the campaign, but how do you think the Matthew Guy's campaign went?
I think he's been terrific. We focused on the two major issues, which are law and order and the cost of living, subsidiary issues like the CFA, safe schools, injecting rooms, Skyrail, etc., taxi licence. There's a lot of issues out there. But the main two we've concentrated on, I think Matthew's done a terrific job and the team have done a very good job focusing on those issues. But Labor aren't mugs. They run good campaigns too. So it's not a free kick. And what we know in Victoria is there hasn't been a majority government that's faced re-election and lost for 100 years. So Victorians always give a majority government a second term. And the Napthine government lost its majority, of course, when it lost. So Victorians vote for stable government. They like stable government, and in a century, the first-term majority government hasn't been kicked out if it's kept its majority at the end, which this government has. So that kind of stability is obviously working well for Andrews.
You mentioned the focus on crime there. Clearly, that's been not just a part of this campaign, but a part of the opposition's pitch for years now. If you have a look at what the polls say, though, or while they do show that it's a coalition advantage, it's a pretty slim one. So, in retrospect, was it right to make it the centrepiece that it was?
Well, after what happened in Burke Street, of course it was. You know, a lot of Victorians are very worried about their safety, and a lot of those are in the marginal seats. They're in the outer city, Sandbelt areas, Narre Warren, Cranbourne, those types of areas. Carrum, people there worried about, you know, carjackings, home invasions, gangs. I mean, why wouldn't they be worried? And that's what the Liberal Party, in its DNA, we understand that one of the most important roles for a state government is to keep people safe, as the federal government's role is to protect the borders. That doesn't make everybody happy, but that's the way we roll, and that's they're important Liberal Party brand equities, and we don't back away from that. But you know, as I said, first-term governments are hard to beat. I think Matthew's been terrific, but Andrews is no mug, and you know, he's was left a very good economic, you know, budget by Dennis Napthine and Ted Baillieu. So this seems to be the way of politics. I mean, these people get into government, they run up huge debts, the public gets sick of them, throw them out. We're left to cut expenditure to get the budget back into surplus, and then Labor say kick the Liberals out because they cut everything. I mean, this is the cycle of Australian politics at the minute. So,
all right. Well, once we actually get some results, we might come back for another chat. Thanks,
Pleasure.
Michael. Michael Kroger, the Victorian Liberal Party president there. We'll throw back to you from the Benito Club.
Well, it's just gone 6:15. You're watching Victoria Votes live from the ABC's Election Centre at Southbank in Melbourne. I'm Tamara O'Dine.
And I'm Michael Rowland. Let's pick up on the back of that chat there. John Pizzuto, Michael Kroger not sounding very enthusiastic at all. In fact, he was essentially saying the Andrews government was a stable one.
Being in the Parliament, I can tell you, Michael, I've seen nothing but instability and scandal, to be fair. We'll know the result in short order, OK? I'll put that out there. But the last 4 years has seen a government that has faced and created more scandal than any government in Victoria's state history that I can recall. You've got a number of police investigations, you've got parliamentary inquiries, the Ombudsman, matters that have found their way all the way to the High Court on things like the red shirts rorts. We ended the campaign with a very heated exchange with the government over whether ministers and Labor MPs should have agreed to be interviewed by Victoria Police, an unprecedented position for us as a community to face. And we've got you know, a Victorian community that has cast their votes on candidates, not knowing what the future of those candidates might be.
But on that though, John, voters don't seem to be particularly perturbed by that red shirts issue.
We'll see soon enough, and you may be right. But does that diminish the issue? Does that diminish the importance of upholding the highest standards of our public officials? And when you've got ministers of the Crown and elected officials who are facing requests from Victoria Police to go and sit down in interviews, you know, I think it's appalling that they didn't, and I think it sent a very bad message. So the government may be returned or not. We'll see in short order, but I don't think that diminishes or takes anything away from the fact that it has been scandal-ridden.
I just want to pick this up with you, Jill Hennessy. Do you think the red shirt scandal, and it is a scandal, 6 ministers under police investigation, did sway many votes today?
Look, I think people are really focused on the day-to-day issues that affect their life. I think they're focused on being able to have access to things like good public transport and roads, good hospitals, good education services. They also want a government that is prepared to invest in the future, and the suburban rail loop, I think, was a stunning example of why there is such hunger in our community for governments to make longer-term investments around infrastructure. And as John said, the proof will be in the ballot box around what people genuinely cared about. My own personal view is that they care about their local services, infrastructure, good hospitals, good schools, but time will tell.
Why is it, do you think, though, that they're not particularly concerned about that issue? Is it a lack of understanding, perhaps? Why is it that it's not really registered with people?
Look, I don't know. I certainly know that when I'm out in communities, and I'm out a lot, I'm in hospitals and in local communities all of the time, they're simply not the issues that people are raising with me. They're raising infrastructure, good local services, jobs, all of those sorts of issues. And I think what we just saw from Michael Kroger was quite a magnanimous, may I say, readjustment of expectations about what this night will deliver. His concession that we have in fact delivered stable government, we have in fact delivered on our election commitments, and I think and I hope people will give us some credit for
There's
that.
an election slogan for you in 2022, well, if you're re-elected. Now, in a matter of minutes, we'll start to get very early figures, we stress, from some of the 1,795 polling booths right across Victoria, but there are a number of key seats that we'll be looking at very closely tonight. 4 of those are in what's known as the Sandbelt region of Melbourne's southeast. Seats like Bentley, Mordialloc, Carrum and Frankston are all held by the government on wafer-thin margins. Our roving reporter tonight, Raph Epstein, will be bouncing between those seats, as only he knows how. He joins us now. Raph, good evening. Where are you at the moment?
Michael, we've been through that seat you mentioned, Bentley. We're about to get into the electorate of Carrum, and then this train on the Frankston line, of course, continues on through the seats of Mordialloc and Frankston. As you've been mentioning already, these are the seats that either party probably has to win government. Those 4 Sandbelt seats have been won by whichever party has formed government at the last 4 elections. And both parties have thrown everything at these seats. Bentley especially is a real bellwether. It's gone with government at every election in this century. I've been in and out of Bentley this week. It is plastered with Labor Party billboards, the really expensive ones on the side of the freeway, the digital ones. They've also really gone big on the largesse. The Labor Party only hold Bentley by less than 600 votes. They have spent big on level crossings, train stations. They made a big promise to rebuild one of the best-known schools in that district, McKinnon High, and that would, if they were elected, be rebuilt in time for the next election. But I can tell you the Liberals have been really serious about that seat as well. Quite a few people in the Liberal Party have told me that there is no electorate in the state that has had as many doors knocked on and telephone calls made to homes in Bentley. They are making sure that they leave nothing on the field. And in fact, Asher Judah, the Bentley candidate for the Liberal Party, tells me that he's knocked on 20,000 doors in the last few years. So both sides are doing all they can to win the 4 seats that have gone with government at the last 4 elections.
OK, Raph, thank you. Don't forget to swipe off, by the way. Raph Epstein there on a train on the Sandbelt region. Hey, we're off the mark officially. We have first figures in. Anthony, over to you.
Right, let's see how the technology goes here. Let me go. First one's Gippsland South. We have 2 polling places, which is Mara Warra and Tatune. So I don't know where they are, but very early figures. As you can see, 75% very strong for the National Party. We're expecting to get quite a few from seats like Gippsland South because there are only 3 candidates at this stage. And just in case anyone's interested, the 2-party preferred swing on that one is 4.3% to Labor, but that's a very early figure. And that figure there is a projected figure based on swings. The next electorate is Lowan. We've got 0.3% counted. I didn't see exactly how many votes there were, but they're clearly not very many. And Emma Keeley's well ahead on those numbers, as you'd expect in these safe rural seats like this. And Euroa, which is in central Victoria, Steph Ryan, the Deputy National Party leader, again, 0.3%, 76.3% for her. So, as I said, let's have a look at the swing there, just because it's always interesting. 1.7% to Labor, but these are very early figures. But not much analysis can be done on them at this stage, but we're starting to watch and waiting for some more important figures, some more significant figures for telling us what's the overall result, because these are all, of course, important figures for the people who live in these electorates.
But nothing makes Anthony Green happier as the minute those figures come in, so we're off the mark, which is fantastic to see. Now, the leadership change in Canberra could not have come at a worse time for Matthew Guy, and right throughout this election campaign there has been plenty of speculation about just how the knifing of Malcolm Turnbull would hurt the Liberal chances here in Victoria. For more on that, we're joined now by Insider's host Barry Cassidy, who is there alongside Richard Willingham. Barry, what impact will the shenanigans in Canberra have on the Liberal vote tonight, in your view?
Well, I've always taken the view that both federal and state levels, elections are decided on federal and state issues, depending on the election, and they're decided on performances over 4 years. I think we exaggerate the influence that campaigns have on results. People judge on the performance of the government over the previous 4 years, in this case, or 3 years at the federal level, and the viability of the opposition. But there are exceptions to all circumstances, and we have one this time because the disruption in Canberra is very recent. It's been going on for 3 years within the Liberal Party, but the leadership change was only 3 months ago. And I think the other factor to keep in mind there is that Malcolm Turnbull is broadly popular in Victoria, probably more popular in Victoria than anywhere else. Yep. And Matthew Guy was robbed of that opportunity of campaigning with Malcolm Turnbull. I think that would have helped.
Scott Morrison is a very Sydney character, isn't he? He's always talking about his beloved rugby league team, and he's always talking about the Shire as well. So I guess that's not really getting much cut through here.
Well, to this point anyway, Scott Morrison in Victoria, I think it's fair to say that people are either, some of them hostile or at best maybe ambivalent towards him at this point. It's true that some of the main players at the federal level in all the leadership disruption are either from Queensland or New South Wales, and they're not from Victoria, but Victoria hasn't been immune. Julia Banks, for example. Now, that got a lot of attention, and the treatment of women within the Liberal Party centred on Victoria there for a while. So I don't think there was any escaping that. I think the state Liberal Party, if they were to get a bad result tonight, would be entitled to look north. And
it was pretty clear that there was a lot of distance being put between the Prime Minister and the state Liberal Party here, because he only appeared here during the campaign once, and it wasn't strictly a campaign event that he went to.
Yeah, just the once. And that was brought about because he wanted to pay respects
to Sister
after
Malaspina
the Street attack. Yeah. Though there was a bit of controversy about then holding a news conference so close to the side of mourning, so there were an upside and a downside to that event. Neither did Bill Shorten, even though he's a Victorian. He wasn't prominent in the campaign either. I think that the state leaders preferred it that way.
John Pizzuto, and I say this to both you and Jill Hennessy, it has gone 6 o'clock, the votes have counted, so you can be as candid as you like, OK?
We want human answers,
drink the
drop
ABC
the politicians'
truth
speak.
syrup. And on that point, John Pizzuto, surely, and I think you've said this, acknowledged this publicly during the campaign, the knifing of Malcolm Turnbull will hurt the Liberal vote tonight.
How do I put this?
Very honestly, John.
That's what we want. How badly?
Look, I think, I'll tell you, I mean, this morning, I don't mind telling you, we have all our own little anecdotes. This morning I had to spend quite a long time talking to two constituents who I had to try to retrieve support from, who were Liberal voters and were upset with the shenanigans. I do want to say this. I've given you a very candid answer, and you know, that is the way we feel. But we've got to be careful not to blame only one thing. We've got to look at how things affect campaigns overall. So that has been a difficulty for us to deal with, and I've said that publicly. And I've noted it during the campaign. I know my colleagues have. Again, we don't know the results yet, so we'll see what happens tonight. But that factor has certainly not helped us.
It must be particularly difficult too, John, because you have no control over that. So in essence, you're watching these events through your fingers as they're unfolding, knowing the eventual impact they're likely to have.
Yeah, there's a bit of that, and I think Labor Party people would recall earlier times when federal politicians have indulged, and we've all been through it, and I think we'd all agree that it just doesn't help.
Well, the Deputy Premier, James Merlino, has held the seat of Monbulk since 2002, and he joins us now from the electorate. James Merlino, welcome.
Thanks very much.
Now, it's looking like you'll probably hold on to the only Labor-held seat in Melbourne's east. You are, of course, in CFA country there. How do you expect the CFA dispute to impact on the result for you there tonight?
Well, we haven't started to, well, they've started to count now, but we've got no indications yet. But all I can answer the question is the experience over the last few years and my experience in my community is the things that has resonated in the community has been investment in schools, investment in Maroondah and Angeles hospitals, the rail program. The thing that really resonated was our commitment around suburban rail loop. So the issue of fire services, reform, the CFA, has not been an issue that has really resonated.
Even though you had to remove your Liberal opponent, John Shearing,
years.
from the CFA board a couple of years ago, that hasn't had any effect?
Not on the ground. You know, in terms of the Liberal Party and their campaign, obviously they're trying to make a big thing of it. But in terms of the feeling on the ground, I can only answer in terms of the experience that I've had. I hasten to add, we haven't had indications from the booths yet, and this is my 5th election, so I'm not going to be making any rash statements right now. Perhaps when I talk to you a bit later on, we can go into some more detail. But my experience on the ground is that what people want to hear about is jobs, health, education, road and rail, the things that make a difference to people's lives, and that's what I've been talking to my community about and delivering for the last 4 years.
James, it's Richard Willingham here. That you've been a target in that seat of some campaign material from people who are against safe schools. How did you feel about those attacks?
Yeah.
They became quite personal.
Yeah, it's quite a disgusting campaign, and it's been going on for a number of years now. A lot of lies and myths about safe schools, and they're running it not just in my electorate but in communities and electorates across the state. Safe Schools is a program that saves lives, and I'll talk about it till the cows come home. This is a program that saves lives. It's an anti-bullying program. It's not in the curriculum. It's not sex education, but unfortunately it's been whipped up in the lead up to the same-sex marriage debate, and it's been used by our opponents through the course of the last couple of years and during the campaign. But I don't think it resonates in the broader community.
James, the Liberal Party has been talking up privately that Monbulk is one of their target seats. Have you felt much of their presence there? They say their ground game is very strong. Have you felt that? Do you think that your margin of 5% is under threat?
Anthony, I feel that every campaign. This is a contested seat. It's the only Labor-held seat in the outer eastern region, so it is contested every single time. So another strong campaign by my opponents, and I want to acknowledge that. And we had that last in 2014, 2010, when we just got through on the skin of our teeth. So it's always a contested electorate, and this year was no different.
And James, thanks for the job promotion there. But have you had a chance to speak to your boss, Daniel Andrews, tonight, and how's he feeling?
I haven't spoken directly with Daniel as yet, exchanged a few messages and just getting a sense of how other campaigns are tracking across the state. But during the day and in the hour post polling closes, it's about how we feel. What's the feeling on the ground? And the feeling on the ground has been generally positive, but nothing beyond that. So that's what I'm hearing from elsewhere. That's what I felt on the ground here in the seat of Monbulk. But we'll see when the figures start to come in.
And so, what thing are you most looking forward to getting on with on Monday? Do you think that you'll be straight into work, or do you think you'll get a few days off?
No, straight back to work. If we have the privilege of a second term, it's straight back to work. For me personally, there's a lot more that we need to do, whether it's in education or here in my seat of Monbulk. There's so much more to do. So I'm ready to get back to work on Monday if the Victorian electorate decides that's the case.
Thanks for your time, James.
Cheers.
OK, let's go to the real Anthony now, shall we? Anthony Green at the wall, and we are paying close attention tonight, Anthony, to those country seats where the coalition is under serious threat from various independents.
Yeah, well, just we're getting an update every strict 5 minutes, and so we're hanging there watching for that 5 minute to tick over and see what happens. Shepparton, we've got the first figures. This is Susan Sheed, who's the sitting independent, won this at the last election up against Peter Schwartz for the National Party, 34.8. The Liberals are running this time because they've been allowed in because the Nationals lost it the last election. If you look at the change in vote, let me get my buttons right, is that there's a slight increase in the independent vote and a lot of the national vote has disappeared and there's a rise in the Liberal vote. So no firm trend on those figures yet, but on those numbers, if I go back to the first preferences again, well, they're very early votes, actually. Susan Sheed will win on those, but of course they are very early votes. Next up, Mildura. These are slightly bigger, 1.7% counted. Peter Crisp on 52%. Ali Cupper is a former Labor candidate in 2010, came second as an independent last time and is trying her luck again this time. She's a clear second on these numbers, and so that's the seat we'll be coming back to in the night. That's one of the seats where the independents are challenging. Ovens Valley, Tim McCurdy, who's had his legal problems recently, Tammy Atkins, who's associated with Kath McGowan, and she's finishing second there ahead of the Labor candidate. We'll be coming back to that later in the evening with only a tiny vote at this stage. There's no firm prediction we can make there. This is just to go through that we've got some numbers here. It's not on my map there, but I just got some first figures for Bass, so I'll bring them up directly. 0.2% counted. It's a place called Katani. I don't know where it is. 66.4%. Jordan Crugnale is the Labor candidate on 22.4%. But we are able to calculate the swing in that polling place. And the swing in that polling place is 5.8%, which is enough to turn that seat around. Of course, that's only one polling place. But that does show that this is what we can do in the computer. Is, as I said, on those first figures, it was 83 to 28. But when we compare it polling place by polling place, we can get that more accurate swing. So there's no firm trends yet at this stage, but the figures are coming in.
Thanks, Anthony. So while we're talking about more regional seats, Barry, what actually is going on in the regions at the moment where we have the Nationals under threat from so many independents?
Yeah, well, the regions were lost to the coalition through, started with Steve Bracks, and they haven't managed to get it back in that time. And then since then, you've had this outbreak of support for independents. And what I'll be keeping an eye on tonight as well is the Cathy McGowan factor in the northeast. Tammy Atkins, who was mentioned there, has been the subject of some newspaper advertisements paid for by the National Party which indicates they're of some concern that she might be making an impact. And in Benambra, Jackie Hawkins and the other Jenny O'Connor are two independents who I think we should keep an eye on their votes. I'm not suggesting that they could threaten the sitting member, but it'll be interesting to see though, because Jackie Hawkins actually worked as a policy advisor for Cathy McGowan, and Tammy Atkins was a founding member of the organisation that Voices for Indi that got Cathy McGowan onto the federal stage. So that's one area to focus on as well.
Well, they're actually calling it doing an Indi now, aren't they?
Maybe doing a Cathy might be more accurate.
Good stuff, Barry. We'll come back to you shortly. Now, from the safe Liberal seat of Kew, we're joined now by the Shadow Education Minister, Tim Smith. Tim Smith, welcome to you. In all honesty, do you think your party has done enough to win back government tonight, particularly looking at those polls?
Well, the polls are suggesting a tough night for the Liberal Party, but it's only 6:30, so we're going to have to wait a few hours. We're also going to have to particularly wait until the pre-poll votes are counted. Unprecedented pre-poll votes cast at this election, almost 45% before election day. It goes back 2 weeks, and there's been quite some ups and downs in this campaign from both sides over the last fortnight, particularly the 15% of votes cast in week 1 of pre-poll.
Tim, it's Richard Willingham here, mate. Just wondering, Michael Kroger was speaking to us before earlier, saying that it's always tough for a one-term opposition to unseat a government, and they're saying that Daniel Andrews had actually run a stable government for most of it, and he said it was very tough, and that Daniel Andrews was, quote, no mug. Now, you particularly, and some of your colleagues have been running a campaign that says Daniel Andrews is the worst Premier Victoria's ever had. So how does that match up with what Michael Kroger has just told us?
Well, Daniel Andrews is certainly an extremely left-wing Premier, and he's probably this is the most left-wing government Victoria has seen since Kane and Kerner in the late 80s, early 90s. Not that you or I would recall that, Richard, but I think Daniel Andrews hasn't led a united team at all, and we've seen some terrible infighting between various factions, particularly within his own socialist left faction.
And do you think that your campaign has been focused on the issues that Victorians are picking up? You have highlighted the Red Shirts Rort scandal, but do you think voters are picking up on that?
Look, those beltway issues are always difficult to get out to the public. I think the public are very cynical about politicians lobbing, I suppose, grenades at one another, for want of a better term. Voters are usually more interested about what matters to them, particularly things like wasting $1.3 billion to tear up the East-West Link contract, for example. Crime has obviously been a huge issue throughout this campaign because it is a huge issue in Victoria. Infrastructure is a big issue, but probity and ethics in government is still an issue, and people are genuinely concerned about it amongst all sides of politics. And you've seen, for example, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker forced to resign for rorting their various electoral allowances. So that has played a part over the last 4 years. But come election day, most voters are worried about what impacts them and their family and the future of the state, whether that be education, infrastructure or crime.
And Tim, have you had a chance to make a call across the Eastern Freeway to Matthew Guy, the Liberal leader, and assess his mood tonight? And how's he feeling?
I spoke briefly to Matthew some time ago, and he's run a very, very strong campaign and has done a wonderful job as our leader over the last 4 years. And as I said, we'll have to wait for a couple of hours to see what the result is.
We've just been talking too about the impact that the switch of leadership in Canberra has had on your campaign. Is that something that you agree with? Is that something that's really sort of been a chain around your neck?
Look, it hasn't helped. When you've got federal politicians constantly talking about themselves and their various ambitions, that hasn't helped our party like it didn't help Labor during the Rudd-Gillard years. And that's brand damage that we at the state level have to deal with, but can't do anything about. We were 51-49 behind in August. We had a very strong primary vote, and obviously, according to opinion polls, and we'll find out the result of the election obviously later on this evening, but according to opinion polls, there has been a change in our fortunes in a very negative fashion, according to opinion polls, and there's only been a couple of changes at a macro level, and one of them was obviously a change in Canberra and a couple of weeks of introspection from federal MPs that possibly didn't help so much.
Thanks for your time, Tim. Enjoy the night.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich. Now, Anthony has some numbers that he'd like to talk us through. Anthony.
Yeah, this is just an explanation of why we don't spend a lot of time on the really early figures. It's the electorate of Hawthorn. I thought I'd bring it up because John's on the panel. And the first figures are they're from Glen Iris, which I think might be an external booth, and John's well ahead on first preferences. When we factor in the swing, we've got a 16% swing and Labor well ahead. This is one very small booth. I'm not predicting Hawthorn to be won by the Labor Party tonight, but I just thought I'd show it as an example of why we're not spending an awful lot of time looking at the various first figures, because you can get some odd ones like this.
Thanks, Anthony, so you can afford to...
It's kind of cruel, Anthony. It's kind of cruel.
Sorry to do that to you.
Are you okay?
I have enough grey hair.
Hey, Anthony, while you're there, can you explain to our viewers they're seeing on the dashboard there 2 seats we have given to the LNP? Can you just talk us through that?
That's Lowen and Gippsland South.
Okay.
I don't think there's any doubt about those. We've got about 2% counted in both of those, and those electorates are doing exactly what you would expect on those polling places that we've received, and so it's we can quite comfortably give those seats away. We do that with very safe seats. With very safe seats, you do not get 30% swings after 4 polling places, so you can usually give them away. Seats which are much more marginal, they take much longer, but these early figures, they're little tiny polling places. Once you've got 5 or 6, you can give them away if the swing is consistent.
So the numbers are just incrementally coming in now. We're likely to get quite a few big dumps of numbers later on in the night because of all of those pre-polling numbers.
So we'll just pick up one of the earlier seats, Bass. Very, very, very early figures showing a very large swing to the ALP. With those caveats in place, Bass is clearly a seat the Labor Party has been targeting. How hopeful are you if the swing is on in your direction, picking that up tonight?
Look, we have worked very, very hard to try and persuade the good voters of Bass about our infrastructure and services agenda. No question about it. There has been some significant growth down the Pakenham end of that electorate. We believe that our offering around infrastructure, good schools, good services, we hope that that will resonate. But as I said, it's early days. Our candidate there, Jordan, she has been a local mayor. She's well known in the electorate. She's worked tirelessly. So, you know, I am not without hope about Bass, but that would be a fantastic victory for us if we're able to pull that one off.
Watch that space. OK.
Thank you, Jill. Now, standing by to speak to us live is the leader of the Greens, Samantha Ratnam. Samantha Ratnam, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you.
It's not been the best campaign for the Greens, has it? It's been scandal after scandal. How are you faring this evening?
Well, we've had a challenging few weeks, that's for sure. However, that's in the context of us running an extraordinary campaign, the biggest campaign we've ever run in a Victorian state election. We've knocked on over 160,000 doors. We had over 6,000 volunteers at voting centres today. The mood was really good on the ground. I visited a number of voting centres supporting our candidates, and we're really hopeful, but there have been challenges.
Sam, it's Richard Willingham here. What's your target tonight? You hold 3 seats. Are you trying to make that 5? What's a pass mark for you tonight?
Well, we're really hopeful of making breakthroughs. We've campaigned very strongly in the seats of Richmond and Brunswick. We hope that they'll become green for the very first time. We do know that, however, that these seats are hard to win. We are up against big party machines backed by huge corporate money. We run grassroots campaigns fueled by thousands of volunteers, and that's what makes our campaigns really grounded, really positive and optimistic. We've also seen very negative campaigning from the Labor Party with several very concerning incidents over the last few weeks. They haven't taken us on policy or ideas. Instead, they've resorted to lots of dirty tricks and mudslinging, which is pretty negative and disheartening. In the upper house too, you know, we're really concerned about the preference harvesting and the right-wing parties getting together to possibly deliver the most number of right-wing seats in the upper house that we've seen before, and that really stymies any progressive hope for this state if we get those right-wing parties dominating that next Victorian Parliament.
Sam, you talk about mudslinging, but do you regret standing by your candidate in Footscray, given some of the lyrics that he came up with and what damage that has done to the Greens brand during this campaign?
As I said during the campaign, those lyrics that were referenced were reprehensible and unacceptable and have no place in our community. But here we had a young man who was caught up in a culture of toxic masculinity and made a very conscious choice to change his life. And we back that change. We back men fronting up.
Last year he made similar comments, just last year. And then when that was revealed, you continue to stand by him. And a lot of people out there are asking why you did that. And that's done some damage to your party. Do you accept that?
Well, change is a journey. It's not straightforward. And we want more young men to start taking responsibility, more men to start taking responsibility if we are really going to address this culture of toxic masculinity that is affecting us globally, not just our political party, all political parties, all institutions, media organisations themselves. So we have to be part of the change, start role modelling how people can take responsibility, how they can turn it around, and all of us contribute to the attitudes and behaviours that need to change if we're going to create cultures that are safe and welcoming to women everywhere.
What's the latest on your investigation into the candidate for Sandringham who you had to force to stand aside because of misconduct allegations?
As we said, a very serious allegation was made, and it's about 36 hours ago now. We acted very swiftly and decisively, and that candidate was stood down immediately, and no campaigning has happened for the seat of Sandringham.
And Sam, what now back to the results tonight, have you got any sort of indication from scrutineers about how it's tracking in the very early details?
Yes, very early days. Haven't seen those numbers yet, so we'll just watch and wait now. We're really hopeful. We're looking forward to spending time with volunteers now in these early stages to thank them for their incredible work, and to everyone out there who's volunteered and supported us. We thank you so much. We are a grassroots movement powered by each and every one of you, and we're really thankful, and we're going to spend some time with our volunteers and watch those results come in.
Thanks, Sam.
Samantha Ratnam, the leader of the Greens. So currently the Greens hold 3 seats, Melbourne, Prahran and Northcote. They're wanting Brunswick, Albert Park and Richmond tonight. What do you think their chances are of that, given what has unfolded over the past few weeks?
Well, a couple of comments. I think first and foremost, what we saw there was a total cop-out. Leadership is actually about stepping up and taking responsibility around that kind of sexist and misogynistic behaviour that we saw.
So you don't think Angus McAlpine should have been given a second chance?
Absolutely not. And they could not get their version of events right. It started off, he was on a journey, and that was a long time ago. More revelations. Then they stood by him again. Then there were yet more revelations. And then we've seen the issues around Sandringham. I mean, I think revealing the Greens to be fake in their values will have some consequences. Whether that's enough for us to maintain our hold on Brunswick and Richmond, time will tell. But do not cop this, we are a grassroots party organisation. They have a responsibility. They are big political players, and I think that this will have long-term consequences for the credibility of the Greens and for the credibility of Samantha Ratnam.
Barry Cassidy, what's your view on that?
They've blown it. They've really blown it over the last few months. We haven't seen the figures come in yet, but that's just clearly the impression you get, because they've had problems with sexism and sexual harassment, and quite frankly, the way that they've dealt with it has just left people astonished. Because there doesn't really seem to be any effort. You know, tonight they should have been, with the Liberals out of Richmond, they should be looking at winning Richmond. They certainly should have Brunswick over the line. But instead, I think they'll spend the night watching their backs. I think they'll be keeping a close eye on Melbourne and Prahran and see whether they can hang on to those seats.
I think they're in big trouble in Prahran, actually. I think it's really opened the door potentially for Labor to come through, get into that second spot. The Liberal Party got a very good candidate for that seat there. But they're also, that's a sort of seat where the Malcolm Turnbull factor will probably play against the Liberal Party particularly acutely. So there's an opportunity for Labor there, while the Greens are having their own issues and the Liberal Party is having their issues. So that's one to watch. But in saying that, we've been talking about the Greens' issues internally, about their toxic culture, but it'll be fascinating to see whether their sort of constituency and their voters actually follow that, whether they're actually affected by the negative media stories about their culture. So that is something to watch tonight, because they may defy the reporting and the culture, the political culture there.
I mean, those 2 seats are very, very hard. There is absolutely no question about that. We're losing a high-profile member in Jane Garrett in Brunswick. That is a really, really tough seat for us to hold and win. Richard Wynne has the added additional burden of having no formal Liberal Party candidate running in that seat. He's an extraordinarily hard worker with a good local profile, but these are very, very challenging seats, and we obviously have to pick up other seats to protect ourselves against the risk of loss in the inner city, but we're not given any ground yet.
OK, looking at the broader electorate there, as we can see there, it's just on 10 to 7. That dashboard is ticking over even more vigorously. Anthony Green, take us through it.
Right, let's go to our seat run. I didn't hit my microphone then. We're doing a couple of elections just because the count is more progressed. 2.4% counted here in Forest Hill. Neil Angus against Manoj Kumar, I think it is pronounced. Sorry, let me go back. I went click the wrong button there. My fault. If we look at the two-party preferred swing that's going on there, there's a 6.5% swing to Labor. Now, that's one biggish polling booth, but we're seeing a few interesting swings. In Narrabeen, we've got preference counts in a number of polling places. That's the first preference figures. The change in vote that's occurring is that the Labor vote's well up, the Liberal vote's down, the Green vote's down, and that's translating with a preference count in 4 polling places into an 8% swing to Labor. Now, I've just brought those up because they're some of the stronger counts. Some of the other ones are only seeing 0.2, 0.3%, and I don't think they're very reliable. Now, I just got South West Coast up because there have been independents doing well there. Roma Britnell's on 49.6%, Labor's second. James Purcell, who's we've marked as an MP because he's coming down from the upper house, Jim Dukas, Michael Noah. So these independents are not doing quite as well on those first figures. These will be smaller rural booths, and some of them may have a stronger base in Warrnambool and Portland itself, but that's some other figures. Now, I did want to get first figures from South Barwon have come in, so let's see if I can bring them up. 2.1% counted. Andrew Katos on 35.5, Darren Cheeseman 32. The independent, who's from the Surf Coast somewhere, is on 15%. The polling places I've got are Belbray and Moriac, and I think Belbray is on the Surf Coast from memory. And so that may be why he's doing well there. The change in vote that's occurring in that electorate, the Labor vote's up slightly, the Liberal vote down slightly, and it's this other vote there. But that's translating into a two-party preferred swing of 2.3% to Labor, and on those numbers, South Barwon is in doubt. So we're seeing a couple of trends there, and while I'm here, I'll just go and bring up the statewide, the nationwide vote. Let me have a look at the primary vote. At this stage, we've got 1% counted. We're projecting, we correct from where this information is from, projecting Labor towards 42. The Liberals and Nationals are on about 37 to 38. The Greens on 9.4. These are early figures. They're heavily biased by being from country areas, but they're certainly a more accurate trend than the raw numbers if you looked at them. And just to explain that bottom of frame where you're seeing 8 seats, of course, the first seats that are given away and the first seats are reporting are country seats. You don't get many Labor seats given away until we start to get some metropolitan area electorates reporting. So at this stage, while the Liberals are racing ahead, it's a tortoise and the hare situation early in the evening.
And let's go to one of those very important metropolitan seats, one of those sandbelt seats. Bentley, Raf Epstein, has hopped off the train and he's found the Liberal candidate, Asher Judah. Over to you, Raf.
Good evening. Asher, how are you feeling about the day?
It's been a positive day for the Liberal Party. The reception has been very polite and cordial, and we're looking forward to the results tonight.
Some pessimistic, or not pessimistic, but cautious Liberal voices already on ABC TV and radio. You have to win this seat probably to win government. Will you win it?
Well, look, we're optimistic about our chances here. We're not overconfident. No, we wouldn't be that way. But you just don't know. The people of Bentley are cordial and polite people, and we're going to find out in a few hours.
Give people an idea how many calls have been made and how many doors have been knocked on this year in this electorate by the Liberal Party.
Well, the Bentley campaign that our volunteers have overseen is the biggest ground game campaign in Bentley's history. We've door knocked and phone called over 70,000 people, or attempts, in this electorate to engage with people, to make sure that they know that we're listening and that we've got a solution to their problems. And we're going to find out tonight how effective that's been.
70,000 is more than the number of voters.
Well, that's right. So what we've done is when you ring someone and they're not home, we leave a message and we call back. We've got a limit on how many times we do that, but we wanted to make sure that they knew that the Liberal Party wanted to listen to them and hear from them and then respond to their concerns.
Things like the safe injecting room and crime have been a big part of the campaign. Were they the right issues, and are they the issues that actually resonate with people in a really marginal seat like this one?
Well, look, the number one issue people raise with me in the street is community safety. In Bentley, a multicultural seat where nonnas and yayas and boobas come up to you and squeeze your hand and say, I don't feel safe in my house anymore. I'm worried every time there's a possum on the roof and I think I'm going to get home invaded. well, you know you're onto something that's important. And I wanted to communicate to them that we've got a solution to that. We're going to get tougher on crime, we're going to lock people up, and we're going to deploy more police, put an end to Labor's cuts. So I'm confident it was the right message for those people, but ultimately we'll find out if it was a message for enough people later tonight.
A lot of people on the ABC TV coverage as well have been talking about all the shenanigans in Canberra, leadership turmoil. You've been one of the most in contact with voters. Did they raise Malcolm Turnbull to Scott Morrison with you?
Look, I was door knocking the week of the leadership spill. It was not an easy week to door knock, and in the end we said we'll take a week off from that.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So you stopped door knocking because of that?
Well, it's not an easy conversation to have, and the federal matters just needed to be resolved. But after that was resolved and we stabilised federally, we just got on with the job and people went back to their issues. Their top concerns: community safety, inappropriate development in local streets, and the rising cost of living.
The other thing I noticed in Bentley was the number of expensive billboards purchased by Labor, especially in the last week. Did you do enough advertising?
Well, I think we had some of the best advertising available. I had my billboards up in July, 4 months before the election, a big photo of my family to communicate my values and who I was, I guess a peek into my soul as to what drives me.
Yeah.
We also had some big billboards up as well. I think we've run a visible campaign, and I think that was proven on the day. A lot of people came up to me and said, I know you, I remember your photo, it's a girl. I know I've had a baby girl in the last 4 months, so I think it's the right choice, and I'm confident it will at least communicate that the Liberals have a presence here.
Okay, Ashley Judah, thanks for your time. Good luck, as I say to everyone.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thanks very much, Raf. Another key battleground is the inner city seats just to the east and north of the Melbourne CBD, where the Greens look set to be a significant factor in tonight's election. Madeline Morris will be roaming around the inner suburbs and keeping a very close eye on seats like Richmond, Paran and Brunswick for us. Madeline's joining me now. So where are you starting tonight, Madeline?
Hi, Tam. We're starting in the seat of Richmond, the inner city seat of Richmond, which is held by Labor's Planning Minister, Richard Wynne. He's under a sustained assault tonight from the Greens, and which is being helped by the fact that the Liberals have not fielded a candidate here. We're here in the Yarra Primary School. You can see just behind us, they've just started counting the first preference votes. This is what they're going to be doing tonight. They start off with the first preferences, and then they move to two-party preferred, and it's the two-party preferred that will define who actually gets these seats. Now, they're planning on having about 75% of these first preferences counted by tonight. And what's different about this particular election is that they're counting pre-poll votes tonight. Now, in previous elections, those haven't been counted until the Monday, but in this election, as we've been hearing, around 40% of people have cast their votes before today, so that really matters. So that means that we'll be able to have a really good indication tonight of how that lower house is going.
Thank you, Madeline.
Okay.
It's just about 7 o'clock, and this is what the 507 candidates in the lower house are vying for tonight, a seat in Victoria's Legislative Assembly. Welcome back to Victoria Votes 2018, coming to you live from the ABC's Election Centre at South Bank in Melbourne. And we are joined by some new members of our panel this evening. We have with us Senator Jane Hume.
Hello, Tamara.
Hello, and
Hello,
former
Michael.
Premier John Brumby. Welcome.
Good evening, Tamara. Michael.
Welcome to both of you. Yes, we're in for a fascinating night indeed. And Anthony Green, the man himself. In fact, we'll go to Anthony in just a moment. But Jane Hume, I want to pick up with you. We have John Pizzuto, Tim Smith, senior members of Matthew Guy's team already lining up to blame you guys in Canberra and your shenanigans for what's happening tonight. You can have a right of reply here.
Oh, look, I think there's absolutely no doubt that the incidences in Canberra in August will inevitably have had an effect on the state result tonight, and I can only apologise, JP. Look, it was driven clearly by Queensland, but there were some Victorians involved, and I don't know whether they had their state colleagues front and centre of mind at the time that happened, and you know, it's a terrible shame. That said, I don't think it's a reflection on Scott Morrison. I think Scott Morrison has actually played quite well in Victoria. It's just the disruption that was caused by the loss of Malcolm Turnbull.
Pretty savage. Does that make you feel any better, John Pizzuto?
Well, I appreciate what Jane's saying.
The apology there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And Jane's right. Scott's doing what he can and he's playing better. At least the situation has subsided to some degree. It was a lot better than it was, and to that we can be thankful. But overall, it has been quite difficult. But I appreciate what Joan's saying.
OK, let's go to Anthony Green at the wall now. With the very latest, we're seeing those seats starting to mount up right across the spectrum. Take us through them, Anthony.
Well, I'm not going to talk about the seats. I'm actually going to talk about what's going on in the vote at the moment. This is the statewide vote at the moment. 42.3 to Labor, 32 for the Liberals, 5 for the Nationals, 9.5 for the Greens and 11 for others. Let's look at the change in vote that's going here. Labor up 4, the Liberals down 4 little small changes otherwise. And that's turning into, which one is, that's the one there, it's my two-party preferred swing, a 2.1% swing to the Liberal Party. But there's something quite odd going on in these numbers, and having seen John Brumby there, it's the opposite of 1999.
Thanks, Anthony. Jane, just picking up on what you were talking about before, the antics in Canberra having an impact at a state level, how does that make you feel coming up to a federal election next year, seeing how the Liberal Party's faring here?
Well, obviously, when we have a federal election, we would hope to be riding on the momentum from a successful night this evening and a successful result in the New South Wales state election as well. So, look, it does have an impact. I think it probably gives us an indication as to where the impacts of the leadership change are playing the most. Whether it be in metropolitan Melbourne, whether it be in regional centres, it's going to be an interesting result tonight. I think it will be quite telling for the federal team.
And John Brumby, over to you, as somebody who has experienced both the highs and disastrous lows of Victorian politics. How are you feeling tonight for the Labor side?
Well, I'm feeling pretty positive. I think it's been a very, very strong campaign. I mean, it is interesting. I don't think you can discount federal factors, but the reality is, if you look at this campaign over the last 3 months, I'd have to say it's been amongst the very best campaigns that I've ever seen. It's been a flawless campaign. It's had some vision, it's had some big announcements, the solar announcement, the outer suburban rail announcement, the free TAFE announcement, the health announcements, Footscray Hospital, Maryborough. So it's really grabbed people's attention, and I think that shifted a lot of votes. And just some of the early scrutineers that are messaging me tonight, this analysis that Anthony's got, I think this is pretty real. So what you're seeing in these seats is very substantial swings to Labor in the metropolitan areas on the primary vote. And the scrutineers, the early results that are coming in, I just got one from Essendon, from Danny Pearson, with a big swing, a double-digit swing in Strathmore Secondary College, my home ground. So I think you're going to see some big numbers. But a very, very strong campaign, helped by events in Canberra.
Michael Kroger said earlier in the program, I'm not sure if you heard it or not, but he was saying that first-term governments are very hard to beat, and it's more of a cyclical win that is perhaps due to the Labor Party tonight, as opposed to a positive campaign. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't think that's always the rule about first-term governments. I mean, history will show that first-term governments can get swings against them. And indeed, the Kennett government in '96 got a 3% swing against it, in fact, when I was opposition leader. So it's not always the case that you'll get a swing to you. But this, I think you'll see tonight. I hope I'm not proven wrong, and I hope I'm not too optimistic too early, but I think what you're going to see tonight is a very, very powerful vindication of the election agenda, and really 4 years of very strong and overwhelmingly stable government, backed by an economy which has got the lowest unemployment rate in Australia. And so those things together, probably exacerbated by the events in Canberra, and really for Victorians to think that Peter Dutton came within just a few votes of being the Prime Minister of Australia, that probably frightened a lot of Victorians as well.
John Pizzuto, are you reading the writing on the wall a bit clearer now, about an hour in? Are you bracing yourself for a disappointing night, in fact, even a really bad night for the State Libs?
Certainly, Michael, the early swings are deeply troubling. We want to see how that evens out across booths and with the pre-poll dump of results, which will come in pretty soon. But certainly the initial results I'm getting from people, with some exceptions, but we're very concerned about some of the early swings that we're detecting, absolutely.
Michael, I think there is something big going on. And again, I think John's put the right caveats on it. But in terms of the reflections around Canberra, I don't think we want to underestimate just how important getting on with government early, and Daniel Andrews got on with government, promised to get cracking on removing level crossings, has heavily invested in infrastructure. We've got the strongest economy, the highest performing economy in the country. We're building a pipeline of schools and hospitals. And I don't think you can play catch-up so close to the election. And I think one of my reflections upon the Liberal Party's campaign, I have kind of looked at where they have been. And 6 months ago, when we were very, very focused on what needed to be done, I would look at where they were putting their time and attention, and they were in safe Liberal seats, and I thought it was more an internal focus rather than an external focus. I might be wrong. I don't want to overestimate what we're seeing tonight, but we are seeing some extraordinary swings in places that I would consider tiger territory from a Labor Party perspective.
We're also in uncharted waters too, given that there was a terror attack so close to polling in this state. That's never happened in this country before. And there was a bit of mystery around what would happen around that. Would people stay with the incumbent or go for change in a time of unease? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you are running a campaign, and our campaign did not start 4 weeks ago. Our campaign started 4 years ago, but particularly over the last 9 to 6 months, we have been very, very focused on the issues that we think are important. But when you are in a campaign and you have such a significant issue and event, it of course makes you reflect upon what might that do around what people think. And the Libs have run very, very heavily on law and order. The fact that they have not been able to bring that home, I think, means that there's some very serious questions for the Liberal Party to be reflecting upon. If these levels of swing keep going, as I said, we do want to see where things land. We could be looking at, kind of very, very diverse booths.
OK, we'll stay across that. Let's go back to Anthony Green, who has some seats that he is paying particular interest in tonight.
Well, before, I just got to making some changes to my rundown here.
Oh no, Anthony.
What I want to do is I want to talk about the statewide vote at the moment, which is looking like that: 43 for Labor, 31.5, 5.1. It's the change in vote that's matter. Now, the two-party preferred is unreliable this early in the evening, but consistently now we're up to 4%. We're seeing Labor up 5 and the Liberals down 5, and most of that is in the metropolitan area. And that's every seat that's coming in is having that trend. There's absolutely nothing in here which is of any good news for the Liberal Party on these early figures. Now, in terms of calling seats and stuff, I want to wait and see some preference counts. But there is nothing good in any of the early figures we're seeing from Melbourne for the Liberal Party. And we've got a couple of seats to illustrate that, which I think, I won't bring up the chamber yet, but, but certainly there's quite a swing on in the air, and it's about 6%. That was 5%, is 6% switch on first preferences in Melbourne. So I think I'm about to do some single seats or something. I'm not quite sure if someone can give you some instructions.
Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, I think it'd be interesting to have a look at seats like Burwood, because Burwood was out there at, I think, 3.2, 3.5. One backed by Labor, of course, under Steve Brack's government, lost in 2010, but not usually a Labor seat. So I think that's one of the bellwether seats that we should have a look at tonight.
Yeah. Jill's got some figures.
Look, I am just getting some information in with significant swings towards Labor in those Sandbelt seats. So that is good news for the Labor Party. There's 10% counted in Ballerine. We're seeing a 7.5% swing. Again, that was one that the Libs had their eye, and that's quite close to South Barwon. It's next door to South Barwon. So that is obviously not good news for the Liberal Party, good news for the Labor Party. Again, we're also hearing some reports that we've seen some really, really significant swings towards James Merlino in his seat.
In Monbulk. OK, let's go to another seat very close to South Barwon, the seat of Geelong. We're joined from there, speak very shortly to the independent candidate, the very colourful independent candidate, former Mayor Darren Lyons, in just a moment. But Richard, a seat that is always of interest at state election time.
Yeah, it is a seat that's been of interest. Labor probably were heading into this election feeling pretty comfortable about Geelong, and then Darren Lyon put his hand up and it sort of changed the dynamic. Obviously a former popularly elected mayor in Geelong who was sacked by this government, so certainly added a little bit of spice to it.
OK, Anthony can now bring us up to date with the very latest figures before we go back to Darren Lyons in Geelong. Anthony?
I understood. I'm not sure if I'm doing it on the touchscreen or full frame graphics. I'll do it on the touchscreen. I wasn't expecting that, which is why I had my back. I apologise to the audience for that. Christine Cousins was on 36%. Freya Fidge is on 25%. Darren Lyons on 24.5%. So as long as Darren Lyons is in third spot there, if I look at the change in vote, the Labor first preference vote is up, and all the loss of Liberal support has gone. The Independent has gained mostly at the expense of the Liberals, and the two-party preferred swing we're estimating on those numbers is 3.7% to Labor. But the key thing for Labor is its first preference is up on last time, and if its first preference is up, I think it's unlikely that there would be a strong enough flow of preferences from the Independent to elect the Liberal. Although if the Liberal slips to third, it might be a slightly different picture. But as long as Labor's first preference value is up, they'd be satisfied with those numbers. Michael.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, Darren Lyons, clearly from those figures you won't win. What prompted your run for this seat in the first place, given the way your term as mayor ended so disastrously?
Well, I wouldn't say it ended disastrously. I'm really proud of what I achieved down here in Geelong as mayor, and in fact the people have voted, I think, pretty much like that today. I'm still feeling really confident down here at the end of the day, and I tell you what, the promises that have been flowing to Geelong in terms of over $1 billion would never have happened if I had not have stood, because you can see by the results already that Liberals are polling pretty poorly here.
Darren, it's Richard Willingham here. So you're taking credit for some of the pork barrelling being promised by both Labor and Liberal?
Well, yeah, of course. Before I put up my hand, there was hardly anything coming because it was an extremely safe seat to Labor. So, yeah, I absolutely will be taking credit for that. And it's fantastic for the Geelong people. And the Geelong people, the way they're going to vote today, I feel, it vindicates that.
And Darren, was any of your tilt at state parliament based on a bit of revenge? You wanted to prove people wrong after being sacked by the government, as the whole council was?
Look, at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is Geelong has always been a poor relation for over 20 years to Melbourne. I was here to bring, for the community, the most amount of success and finance for the community. We're always poor relations. We've been treated like that appallingly for years. I think this is going to be a wake-up call by the end of tonight for Daniel Andrews, if he does become Premier. The fact of the matter is please don't shy away from the Geelong people. You should love us a lot more, and we deserve a lot more, because we are going seriously north. And I think there was a big turnaround from the loss of Alcoa, the loss of Ford back in 2014 when I was elected mayor. We were in deep trouble in this town, and I'll tell you what, we brought it loud and proud globally with $1 billion private money invested each and every year. We've changed this place, and we've changed it as a community together as the people, and you know what? It's been a great billboard for Geelong.
But Darren, state and federal governments, both Labor and Liberal, have been pouring a lot of money into Geelong for a long time. Just have to look at the Cardinia Park football stadium and the amount of money that's spent there. So do you think it has actually been neglected?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to pour money into a football club, is all well and good. It's fantastic. But I'll tell you what hasn't. The trust hasn't worked. It's been an appalling mess. Other than footy for 8 games a year, what else has happened at Cardinia Park under the trust? You know, there's been a lot of money spent for very little return for the Geelong people, at the end of the day. So that's my opinion. And I'll tell you what, the council was doing a fantastic job with that stadium too.
And Darren, should you not be successful tonight, are you going to have another crack at state politics, or are you going to look higher and maybe have a crack at Canberra when that federal election rolls around next year?
Look, we'll wait till the dust settles today. I want to see what happens tonight, because I'm still really on the ballots today, out at every booth today. The supporters were incredible, and I was all over the 23 booths today. I worked extremely hard, and so have all the volunteers here today. There's a strong Darren Lyons message here, and at the end of the day, I'm not going to go away. I'm going to hold both sides, whatever in politics, as I did as mayor, totally accountable. Invest in your people, and they'll give back to you.
And do you think that your vote has come off sort of the Liberal column? It looks like that way. So would you ever entertain sort of running as a Liberal Party candidate?
I think it'll be coming off both, to be quite honest with you. But at the end of the day, it's obvious the Labor was, with their own polling, their own internal polling, they were extremely concerned when I put up my hand. I'd known in advance of the attack campaign that they ran, the fear campaign against Labor voters. We'll see whether that worked or not. The negative campaign they ran against myself as an independent for Geelong, for the people of Geelong. we'll just wait and see what happens. You know what? At the end of the day, an average independent gets 15%. I reckon I'm around about 25% at the moment, a little bit different to you. We'll just see what happens at the end of the day.
And Darren, do you think state politics lacks a bit of colour and pizzazz?
We're sitting.
Oh, there's no question. I think people are totally disillusioned with politicians all around the country. There's no question about that. But at the end of the day, it's not all about pizzazz. It's actually getting things done. As Mayor, I got a lot of things done, and the people have voted like that today, and that's the way I'm feeling. And I'm totally confident about my future. And whether that, you know, I'm never going to say never. I'm a guy that never says never. I'm a worker. Come from a very working class family, and I work hard. Giddy up. Live, love, Geelong.
Thanks for your time, Darren. Cheers.
Oh, right, a reply. I think it's in order here for Jill Hennessy and John Pizzuto.
I don't mind a little
charisma.
I don't mind a little bit of colour and movement, but not that kind of colour and movement, let me tell you. So obviously the entire Geelong region has been a really important focus of investment for our government. You know, what you didn't ask Mr Lyons about, Richard, were some of the offensive text messages and or messages that he put out around some of his federal colleagues as well. And I don't mind a little bit of colour and movement, but I do think that people expect someone who can actually deliver on the implementation of policies. It's very easy to be a critique. It is much harder to be in government. The people of Geelong in our government have had a government that's invested in their infrastructure, their schools, their education, and by the looks of what I'm hearing, they're supporting us in terms of the way that they have
Sorry
voted.
to interrupt you there, Jill. Let's just go to Anthony. I believe he has some important news for us. Anthony.
Well, at the moment, we're seeing quite a remarkable set of swings, and for that reason, I think we're prepared to call this election. There is the chamber at the moment. We'll fill in the seats that seats one, the seats we're definitely giving away. Oh, sorry. Let me go to the chamber. Wrong graphic. I can't remember where I am now. Sorry, chamber. If I go up here and I go, here we go. That's the current. This is the current chamber, which started with 46 for Labor, 30 for the Liberals. With seats we're definitely giving away at this stage, we have the Labor Party on 37 seats and the Coalition on only 16 on these numbers as we're starting to get these huge swings in Melbourne. If I go and have a look at the likely figures, I've got the Labor... that should be moving on to the next figure, which should be... It's not moving on. I'll tell you what the number should be. The number should be nearly 50 at this stage. The Labor Party is getting along... He's just screaming along on the numbers at the moment, and I can't see anything which would indicate, unless everybody who's voted pre-poll has voted completely differently, then these numbers are indicating that the Labor Party has won this easily. And Richard, we've got a couple of seats we should introduce here to explain why I'm saying this.
Yes, we're going to start in the eastern suburbs, start in the seat of Ringwood, which is held by the Liberal Party's Dee Ryle, being challenged by Labor's Dustin Hulse.
Yes, well, let's look at the first preferences here, and you'll see what I mean. Labor is miles ahead with 24% of the vote counted. This is not a seat where Labor leads on first preferences with 14% for the Greens. So with a quarter of the vote counted, Labor is 6% ahead on first preferences. And if we look at that in a two-candidate preferred swing, what we're seeing going on is a 10% swing to Labor, and that is quite remarkable. We're seeing that in quite a number of seats in eastern Melbourne. If we go on to the next electorate, which... Oh, sorry, I'll let you introduce it for me.
Yeah, moving also staying in the eastern suburbs, Mount Waverley, which was a seat that Labor held up until 2010. It's currently held by the Liberals' Michael Gidley and being challenged by Matt Freegan.
The figure's a 4.9% margin, but look again, the Labor Party is leading. We've only got 6.7% counted in this electorate at this stage. But again, with the Greens on 9% and Labor ahead on first preferences, I don't think Labor led on first preferences in any polling places in that electorate last time, or if they did, there weren't very many. That's turning into a 10% swing as well. So that's another swing in eastern Melbourne, which is way above what anyone was predicting.
And then we have a look at the seat of Bass, which is one seat that the Labor Party has really been putting a lot of focus on to, and that's where Brian Painter is being challenged by Jordan Crognale in big growth area of Melbourne. Anthony, what's happening there?
And what we're seeing, we've got a polling place count in three polling places, but look at the first preferences. Labor and Liberal equal on first preferences. The Greens' preferences will favour Labor. Claire Le Service will favour Labor. We've got a preference count in 3 polling places, which will show when we show the two-party preferred. And what that swing is showing is a swing of 9% in that electorate as well. So this is quite a consistent swing. In Bass, I'd be a little more cautious because it's a much more variable electorate and the count's a bit lower. But we are seeing the same swing on first preferences in all electorates. And I think I've got one more electorate.
We're going to have a look at Brunswick, which is one of these Labor versus Green seats where Labor doesn't have an incumbent. Jane Garrett is trying to be replaced by Cindy O'Connor against the Greens candidate, Dr Tim Reid, who has run before for the party. And how's that battle going?
Well, we've got 2 polling places, Brunswick, Northwest and Merry. And the Labor's ahead on first preferences there. I don't know exactly what the numbers were from last time, but I've got the change in vote in those polling places since last time. And the Labor vote is up, the Liberal vote down, the Green vote down. So that is on 2 polling places. They're the sort of figures the Labor Party would want to see on Brunswick. I think we've got a 2-candidate preferred swing there. We're not calling it yet, but that's a small swing to Labor in Brunswick. And that was viewed as the seat that Labor was most vulnerable in those in the northern suburbs.
It's definitely one of the most vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you. So breaking news, if you're watching Anthony Green, you're calling the election there, and it could be, Anthony, a re-election by a very large majority for the Labor Party here.
It could look. The swings in eastern Melbourne are quite consistent and very strong. This looks more like, I mean, the funny thing in the last election, everything was so concentrated on the Frankston line that, you know, the fact that Labor might break into eastern Melbourne again was dismissed. But really, look, on these figures, they're breaking back into eastern Melbourne, which is, you know, what they did in 79 and 82 to get into government and what Labor did in 2002. But basically, this is a path to victory for the Labor Party, which is looking more like the way John Cain won in 82 than some of the ones we've seen since.
You're calling it a clear win for the Labor Party here?
Look, I think this is the big row that you must call it. The thing is, there is nothing in any figure we're seeing at the moment which points to anything but a Labor victory. Now, I haven't got all the preference counts and stuff, but everything's happening on first preferences, and there's no good news in these figures for the Liberal Party.
John Pesutto, you're getting a lot of phone traffic here. What are your people telling you?
Early signs are troubling. Yeah. You know, so we've got a lot of more votes to come out. There's a big pre-poll dump that's yet to come, but certainly I'm getting a lot of messages of early concerns.
Which seats in particular are you most concerned
the
about?
eastern seats, which Anthony was talking about. There's certainly a challenge in the east of Melbourne.
Anything further afield?
Some of the regions I'm getting mixed results, but they're small booths, so I don't want to read too much into those, but certainly some early concerns. So we're watching closely.
Yeah, I'm getting about 50-50 in Ripon, so that one's going to be too hard to call at this stage. We have a really strong candidate, Member of Parliament down there in Louise Staley, and I know she's worked really hard for this one, but it was always going to be our most marginal seat, so she's in for a tough ride tonight, I think. The other one that I'm hearing about too is Bass. Now, Bass, really, we're never going to win those Wonthaggi booths, but Pakenham is really going to be where the action's at, so I'm not quite sure which booths Anthony's looking at this stage, but it's really going to be Pakenham where it's won or lost. There's a very high-profile independent there. It's a cast of thousands, so that one's going to be very tight to call too.
To our Labor panellist, Jill Hennessy, John Brumbury, I guess congratulations. Anthony Green has called the elections. Are you surprised at the extent of
Well,
the election?
look, we'll wait until we've got greater certainty. I am surprised at the degree of the swing out in the eastern suburbs. We're also hearing some very positive news around some of the swings in both Bass and in Ripon. They are both, you know, tough and important seats to win for some of the reasons that Jane outlined. But the swing into the east, the swing in Bentley, the swings that we're seeing along our Sandbelt seats are probably more pleasant news than I might have been expecting at this point of time. And I don't know if, John, if you've got more experience around seeing the big swings in the eastern suburbs, but as long as I have been a Member of Parliament, we have not really held a lot of seats other than Monbulk out in the east. So to see this happening is quite extraordinary.
No, I think that's true. I mean, Anthony mentioned John Cain in 82, but of course Steve Braxton 2002, where we won a swag of those eastern suburb seats. We lost some in 2006. We lost probably the rest of them in 2010, except for James's seat of Monbulk. So they look like they are all coming back. And in addition, you're seeing some of those outer suburban seats, you know, and Bass is almost in that category, showing significant swings to Labor. And just in the, you know, the semi-safe seats, or the safe seats, like more data here I've got from Essendon, from Danny Pearson's seat, So he's on 8 booths in, he's showing 8.57% two-party preferred. So these are very substantial swings indeed. I think what's interesting, the Brunswick, you know, I mean, the two realistic scenarios, I think, tonight for the Labor Party, looking at all of the polling and the news poll this morning, were really Labor in a majority government or Labor in minority, with the Greens winning a number of seats and maybe a couple of slippages here and there. But it's not going to be a minority government, it's going to be clearly a majority government. But the performance of the Greens in those inner suburban seats, Brunswick, everybody thought the Greens were going to get Brunswick. You know, it was a lay-down misère, it was part of that. So I think the interesting ones to watch will be Prahran. You know, what's occurring there? Is it going to go to Labor? Is it going to go, where's that going to go?
What are you hearing there, Jill?
And Richmond, you know, Richard Wynne, where the Liberal Party, out of spite, really, refused to run a candidate to try and nail Richard Wynne. I'll be interested if Anthony's got any figures on Richmond.
I think, and I think almost picking up on the booths today, there were a lot of Greens people saying that they actually think it turned out to the Liberals not running has actually hurt them, because it's driven a lot of Liberals to the Labor Party. And there were, you know, John Howard was here a couple of weeks campaigning with Matthew Guy, and when he was asked about where should Liberals in Richmond park their vote, he said, well, the Greens are the extremists of Australian politics. So it was basically encouraging, you know, the elder statesmen of the Liberal Party telling Liberal voters to not vote Green in a two-horse race is you know, probably really helped Labor, should they hold on there. But, I mean, that's obviously one to watch too.
I'm hearing some exciting news about what might be happening in Prahran as well, in terms of our prospects in Prahran, that we're looking very, very good on the count thus far. I'm hearing in Melbourne, which is a Green-held seat, that it is neck in neck between the Greens candidate Ellen Sandell and Jennifer Canis, our candidate, so that would be quite an extraordinary gain if we're able to sustain that. And in the very safe seat of Box Hill in the east, a 14% swing towards Labor in some of the very traditionally Liberal Party voting booths.
So looking like a big swing to Labor, and likely to have picked up a number of seats that they weren't quite expecting to win tonight. Let's cross to Steph Anderson, who's at Labor HQ. Steph.
Hi there. Well, this has turned into a party a lot earlier than anybody thought. The volunteers have been pouring off the bus and coming through in here, and there's been a run on the bar in the last 5 minutes. Every time a result has popped up on screen, there's been a loud cheer going through the room, and things started out feeling pretty positive here, but now it's really turning into a celebration.
Stephanie Anderson there at Labor HQ, and we've got some very happy people down this end of the table. Not so much this side.
I just got a text from Tony Robinson, the former Labor member for Mitcham, who, after my comments about the big swings in 2002, and he reminded me, of course, of the Mitcham by-election in '98, which was really the end of Jeff Kennett. You know, it was the two by-elections. It was Mitcham and Gippsland West. And they were both 16-17% swings. But so that was the first stage, really, of Labor's march back into the eastern suburbs. And Tony would like me to say that there's an earthquake moving through the eastern suburbs, and it's centred around Mitcham.
And would you have to agree with that, John Pizzuto, being a representative of an eastern suburb seat?
Feel the earth shaking a little bit.
How violently?
It hasn't been good. I'm getting some slight recovery, but it's not at this stage.
Where do you look at hope, John?
Sorry?
Where do you think you've got hope? I'm hearing for us, like in Brunswick, I'm hearing that we are ahead in every polling booth that's been counted out in the east. Our people out in the east would argue that they've been very, very active and engaged, every fete, every railway station. When you're looking at these kind of figures, where do you reach in for hope to think, well, you know, this we might be able to crawl back on?
Yeah, well, at this stage, I'm still waiting, Jill, to be honest. I'm still waiting. I mean, there've been good members out there, and I think you might even concede a little bit that some of the members you know from our side who occupy these seats do work very hard, just as some of yours do. They do work very hard in their local communities. But all boats can rise or fall sometimes.
OK, let's go back to Anthony Green now, who has the very latest at the wall, whether the state of play. Over to you.
Well, the first thing I'll say is you can notice on the bottom of frame there, Labor's up to 44 seats. You need 45 for majority. They're definite victories. Let's look at the statewide vote again. Labor's on 44. That's better than the opinion polls. That's our projected figure. And that includes taking into account the trends in postals and absence last time. The Liberals on 30, Nationals 5.3, the Greens 10.4, others 9.6. look at the change in vote. And this is the thing that we're going on. It's this change in first preference vote. The Labor first preference vote up 6%. The Liberals are down 6%. And that's based on metropolitan booths. We're not projecting preferences. We're not doing anything like that. That's first preference vote. If you have a 6% shift on first preferences, you're pretty close to getting a 6% shift after preferences. And another thing to remember is there's 130 fewer Conservative minor party candidates this time. There's no Family First, no Australian Christians, no Rise Up Australia, very few Australian country parties. So there's a big drop in the number of third party Conservative voters, and yet the Liberal vote is still down 6%. If we look at this translates at the moment into a 5.4% two-party preferred. That's a projected figure. That includes our projections on the postals and absence. So even if we've underestimated what's happening in the postals and absence, it still comes down to towards 55, which was at the higher end of projections. So I think I've been asked if we can just have a look at some seats changing hands, and this is a sign of what's going on. Forest Hill, Mount Waverley and Ringwood, 3 seats in eastern Melbourne, we've got up there as changing seats. And on our doubtful list, you know, these are all eastern suburbs seats. We haven't got anything from, we've got very little from the Frankston line. This is all in eastern Melbourne, what's going on. So, I mean, in other words, if the Liberal Party vote is collapsing in eastern Melbourne, then the Liberal Party just cannot win this election. This may actually be a very big result for Labor yet.
Thank you, Anthony. Can I just get a response from this side of the panel? Jane?
I'm getting quite concerned about Bayswater. At this stage, I'm seeing a very big swing there, around 9% or so. But that said, there are still 9,000 pre-polls to come through, another 3,000 postal votes. So I don't want to count chickens. But I think, you know, Heidi might be in a bit of trouble out there. That would be a shock result, I think. Heidi Victoria's been a really fantastic member of Parliament. She's been there for a considerable period of time. She's worked very hard on the electorate. So that'll be a bit of a blow, I think.
John?
Picking up on what you... yeah, go on, John.
So, no, that would be a big blow to lose Heidi, who's been a terrific member of the team. But, yeah, it's slightly better in rural seats, but not much better at this point.
Picking up what you said before, the on-air apology you gave to your state colleague here about the shenanigans in Canberra regarding the leadership. As Anthony says, it could be a very big result for Labor. How does that make you feel?
Well, okay. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that the leadership change has made some impact. I don't think it is the only issue at play here. I mean, this was an election fought on state issues, really alone almost. You know, law and order, congestion, infrastructure. They were really the issues that the coalition was speaking about here. I'm surprised that things like the red shirts, Rorts scandal, that, you know, transporting your pets in cars, that having knife fights with butter knives in the parliamentary dining room, these sorts of things have not resonated with the electorate.
But Jane and John, does that suggest to you that the wrong battles were chosen, or that they were battled badly, or maybe a bit from column A and a bit from column B?
I think we've got to say that to some extent there's a bit of both at play.
Yeah, it can't just be one thing. All of the issues were important, and as I said earlier,
but maybe you went for the wrong ones, is what I'm asking. For example, the red shirt scandal, that didn't seem to get any traction with voters.
Certainly not as much as we might have anticipated. I think that's true, Tamara. But, you know, we've been arguing with the government on a range of policy fronts. Infrastructure, we've put out quite a bit off the back of the population work that was done over 4 years. Admittedly, some of those announcements did come later in the piece, but it was part of a long process that involved a task force travelling around and consulting with stakeholders and communities all around Victoria. So we're just trying to reconcile all of this, because we contested these fields on a range of fronts, and to see results that we're seeing is certainly deeply concerning and potentially deeply disappointing.
And this is looking like a bloodbath, you know, and I know that if I was in your shoes, John, reflecting upon what did we do wrong, I mean, my personal view around playing too hard on the inside the beltway issues, most people really are not engaged. I mean, it's kind of like trying to get people interested in the internals of a political party. Most people are not that interested in it. Something has gone very, very wrong here with the Liberal brand, and reflecting upon what that is. I also think that due credit needs to be given to Daniel Andrews for running a very strong government for 4 years that people are voting for and supporting in droves in places that we've never seen. One final piece of information is Greens, Paran, I'm hearing 100 Greens, Libs and Labor, all 100 votes or 100 votes within each other.
Okay,
So
well,
that could be
go to the Greens in just a moment, but just John Pizzuto, your response to that, was Matthew Guy out-campaigned by Daniel Andrews? And looking at those staggering results in the eastern suburbs, the jewel of the Liberal crown, all of those seats, there's got to be something in that.
Yeah, as to who wins the campaign, well, the people's verdict is coming in, so we'll see that. But it's all of us. It's not just Matthew. He had a team around him. I was part of that team. We were all part of it, and we all have to stand together on this, whatever the ultimate result is. But, you know, to some extent, issues can be internal in the sense that they're more familiar to people who are involved in parliamentary life and ministerial life, and there are other issues that the broader community will be more familiar with. You have to contest them all. You can't not contest an issue like Rorts or the Speaker or Deputy Speaker who resigned, I think we all agree, in disgrace. You can't leave them alone. They have to be contested.
But was there too much of a focus, for example, on crime and law and order?
We dealt with the issues as they were rising. They were real issues.
But the Liberal Party did push particularly hard on those issues.
And we forced the government to deal with some of those issues, not as well as we'd like. But look, it's clear that they weren't the only issues.
Do you think, John, do you think, though, that you may have over-egged how scared people might have been about crime? Do you think people, I know in the interventions from the federal government, Peter Dutton saying people are scared to go out at night, do you think Victorians just said that that's just wrong?
I was always careful in my remarks, Richard, to make sure that when we talked about people being apprehensive about the safety of their communities, it wasn't all of Melbourne. My area of Boroondara isn't facing the same kind of issues that, say, people out in the west of Melbourne and parts of Western Melbourne face. So I think there's always a need for some nuance and an understanding that not every community is facing the same thing.
And Peter Dutton didn't display nuance.
Well, I said at the time I said at the time that what Peter said was something that a depiction I wouldn't use, but also that he wasn't completely wrong, although it wasn't completely right. There were parts of Melbourne that didn't feel that way, but there are parts of Melbourne that do.
Jane Hume, 2 points to pick up there. Just picking up on what your thoughts on Peter Dutton's stance on that, and also given he was a key player in the successful attempt to roll Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, I think
there's always doubly to blame here.
There's always a danger in commenting on something that's happening in a state that's not your own. So I think that that's one lesson learned. But I do disagree with you to some extent. I think that the issue of crime was very important in this election. I did some door knocking with our candidate Anne-Marie Hermans down in Cranbourne at Lynbrook, and people were locked behind their screen doors because there'd been a riot in a park across the road that just the night before. They were genuinely terrified. It was an issue that resonated down there, so I think it was localised, but it really depended where you were, and perhaps we used a statewide message for localised issues.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you, Jill Hennessy. It's shaping up. It's clear to be a potentially epically disappointing night for the Victorian Liberal Party. It could be the same for the Greens. Let's bring in now the federal Greens leader, Richard Di Natale, at Greens headquarters. We're giving you only 2 seats at the moment, Richard Di Natale, down from your current portion of 3. Are you worried about how this night will shape up for the Greens after what has been a shocker of a campaign for you?
Too early to tell, Michael, and it looks like we've got some solid results in booths around Melbourne and Northcote. Firstly, it does look like we're on track for a big Labor win. So I want to congratulate Dan Andrews and the Labor Party, and what we've seen is Victorians comprehensively reject a really awful campaign based on law and order, trying to divide the Australian community, really an attack on multiculturalism, trying to use that awful crime that was committed during the campaign and ramp up the rhetoric on terrorism. And I thought the Victorian community said very loudly and clearly we reject a campaign based on fear and division. So I do want to congratulate the Labor Party. Obviously, it's still early days. We're still in a good position to hold on to those 3 key seats that we came into the election campaign with, and we're looking very competitive in Brunswick at the moment. So we'll know a little bit more in a while, but a good campaign in the face of an onslaught of negativity and a smear from the Labor campaigners in those key inner city seats. I want to congratulate all of our supporters, volunteers who spent the day handing out on booths. It was a huge effort, and I want to in particular pay tribute to Samantha Ratnam, the leader of the Victorian Greens, who ran a terrific campaign.
Senator, it's Richard Willingham here. You talked just then about a smear campaign, but regardless of how that information was, became public, did the Greens handle that correctly, especially with the candidate in Footscray?
Oh, well, I think Sam made a very clear statement about having real people put their hand up for office and backing them in. And he made a mistake 10 years ago. He owned up to it. And his running during this campaign was his way of trying to do some good. And so we backed him in terms of doing that. And look, Sam is a leader of a party of 8 MPs, 7 of whom are women. 7 of a party room of 8 MPs are women here in Victoria. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because we as a party here have made a really clear effort to try and be supportive in ensuring that we have good, strong women running for us, putting their hand up and backing them every step of the way. We're very proud of our record across the country. We have more women in our state parliaments than men. We've got half of our federal team in Canberra are women. And of course, we want to continue to make sure that we support and create a culture where we see more women put their hand up to stand for political office. And I've got to tell you, look, the Labor Party running a campaign around culture. When it comes to toxic culture, the Labor Party know a thing or two about that. They wrote the book on what a toxic culture looks like within a political party. We'll continue to do what we can in terms of vetting and improving our processes. We do that after every election, and no doubt we'll have a look at this election. But I'm really hopeful that we stand a really good chance in some of those seats, and we hope to make another breakthrough in a seat like Brunswick.
And Richard, if you don't pick up any more seats, and you're clearly not, it doesn't look like the balance of power is now on the cards, but if you don't pick up any more seats, is that a failure? And will you commit, does the party commit to a review of how this campaign has actually been handled?
Oh, well, the vote looks like it's holding up, and we're still in, I think, contention to pick up additional seats. Look, after every election, every party reviews what they've done and looks at ways that they can improve. But look, we had a campaign based on some hugely positive things that we know are good for Victoria and the Victorians embrace. 100% renewable energy, a great forest national park. And I just urge Dan Andrews to back that in, to end logging in some of our precious native forests, to make sure that we've got housing affordability front and centre for Victorians. Look, the Labor government campaigned and indeed adopted some positive progressive ideas through their term of government, things that we've been very supportive of, the safe injecting room, voluntary assisted dying, more rights for people who are renting properties. That's something we wholeheartedly endorse and welcome. And, getting those outcomes is a sign of success. It might not deliver electoral success, but it's a good policy outcome for Victoria. And the Victorians have just said, we're sick of the grubby politics of the Liberal Party. This idea that you can just run this divide and conquer campaign on appealing to people's fears rather than a positive vision for what Victoria and the country could look like. Well, I think Victorians spoke very loudly and clearly. They said no to the Liberals, and they've embraced a very progressive platform. And I'm hopeful that we'll see Greens being part of that in the next government.
Thanks for your time, Senator.
Pleasure.
Well, it has just gone 7:40 and this election is well and truly over. The Daniel Andrews government thumpingly re-elected in a clear swing towards them. And let's bring Richard in and start looking at that tide of red now sweeping through Melbourne's eastern suburbs.
So let's start out in Forest Hill, a seat that the Liberals have held for some time, and they wouldn't have been worried about this. This is Neil Angus up against Manoj Kumar. Anthony?
Neil Angus beat Kirsty Marshall in 2010. As you can see, he's ahead on 46, Labor on 43.8, the Greens 8.2. We've got a preference count in 7 polling places. And when we factor that into the two-party preferred, what we're seeing with the two-party preferred is seeing a swing of 6.1, which is enough to call that as a Labor gain. Look, even if that comes back, we've got them ahead on the raw numbers on 51.6. We're projecting to 51.3. So that's quite a remarkable result. And at this stage, we're showing, I think it's Manoj Kumar. He looks like he's winning. Even if I pronounce his name incorrectly, I think he's just pleased I've called him as a victor there, I suspect. OK.
We'll take a look now at Caulfield, where the shadow and Energy Minister David Southwick has been challenged by Labor's Serena Grasso, in a seat that the Liberals probably wouldn't have been worried about.
And this is an electorate which has a fair bit of variability from polling place to polling place. But at the moment, Serena Grasso is on 45 to David Southwick's 30. Her primary vote's up 11% and David Southwick's is down 11%. And we've got preference counts in 2 polling places, not the whole lot, but it's showing in a 9.5% swing. But that 9.5% swing corresponds to the change on first preferences. Currently, Serena Grasso is on 57.1 after preferences. We're lowering that to 54.7, taking account of the postals and pre-polls in the electorate. It's a very high Jewish population, about a 4% shift comes afterwards. So even taking into account, it's still we're still calling it for Labor at the moment. That's a long time since Labor's won Caulfield.
Let's have a look now at John's seat of Hawthorn, a very safe Liberal seat for some time. He's up against John Ormond Kennedy.
Well, John Kennedy's a great name for a candidate in Hawthorn, I always think. But, you know, let's... John Pesutto, he's on 43.2. Labor's on 34. The Greens have got 17. If we look at, I think we're going on to the two-party bill, I got a preference count in 6 polling places. John is ahead on first preferences on the raw vote, 51.2, but we're projecting him to be behind on 49.1 at the moment. There's a lot more counting to come. That remains in doubt, but the Labor Party's ahead. But if the Labor Party's ahead in Hawthorn at any time on an election night, you know there's a remarkable swing going on.
John, you confident you can hold on to this seat?
I don't feel great, but I think Ted Baillieu sat on a panel not unlike this some 16 or so years ago and faced a similar prospect. But I never regarded Hawthorn as a safe seat. It is an inner metropolitan seat. It has massive changeover, and I've noticed it in the 4 years that I've been the member that, you know, when I sign, as we all do as MPs, we sign the new elector letters. There's a lot of people coming and going. So
what are the main changes there, John?
Just high density, you know, residential living. A lot of people coming in, particularly in the Hawthorn West part. But although these are small booths, they are right across the electorate. So I'm obviously watching with some great concern.
Have you been in any contact? Is you getting any more?
I don't have any new results on Hawthorn, but certainly it's something. In any event, as Anthony said, when you've got Labor in a seat like Hawthorn, although I stand by what I just said about it not being a safe seat, it tells you something's going on. So
something quite big.
Yeah, something huge. Let's go back to Northcote there, another key seat tonight, Richard.
This was Northcote. This was lost by Labor in a by-election last year after the tragic death of Minister Fiona Richardson. Lydia Thorpe defending it against Kat Theophanous.
Now, these numbers that we're showing, Kat Theophanous is 42.9, Lydia Thorpe 40.1, the Liberals 9, there's a Reason Party candidate with 3, an Animal Justice Party candidate on 2.3. We've got a preference count in 3 of the 17, that's on 8 of the 17 polling places. We've got a preference count on 3, and it's got the Greens ahead, I think. If we move on to that. Now we've got the change in vote first. The Liberal vote's well down, the Green vote's up, the Labor vote is up, but it's compared to the last election when the margin was a bit larger for Labor. There's a 7.3%, but that's not enough. That would just have the Greens ahead at this stage.
And we'll just head back south of the Yarra to Paran, which is a seat the Greens hold, but it's one of these seats where there's a genuine three-way contest between the Greens, Labor and Liberal. One the Liberals were really targeting quite hard, but now there's an opportunity for Labor's Neil Farrow to take the seat. He's up against Katie Allen and the incumbent Sam Hibbins.
Well, I've done a manual override to stop this being given away at the moment because I don't know what order the candidates are going to finish. At the moment, we'll just stay there for the moment. The Liberals are in 3rd place. And if the Liberals are in 3rd place, then Neil Farrow will win. But I don't know what order those candidates are going to finish. We'll be coming back to this all night. But if the Liberals finish 3rd, and I'd be surprised if they finish 3rd, you'd have to look. Their vote is down 12% in those polling places, which would put them above 30 by the end of the night. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But that's the change in the vote we're seeing on polling place analysis, but who wins that electorate is saying a 3. That's the preference count that's coming to us from the Electoral Commission. That is an actual preference count, but I have no conviction that that's what the preference count's going to be. So this seat depends on who finishes 3rd, and at this stage we've got no idea who finishes 3rd.
I think the pre-polls are going to be really important in this seat. There was a huge queue at the early voting booths, and Katie Allen is an exceptional candidate there. she's a doctor at the Royal Children's Hospital. She's been out on the ground for a really long time. She's played a fantastic ground game. She's knocked on every door. Sam Hibbins has been reasonably low profile in comparison. You know, this is an interesting seat. This is my home seat. I was responsible for the scrutineering at the last election, and of course it took us 2 weeks to count those those votes, and at the very last minute we re-threw the ballot papers, and rather than Labor coming out in front, it was the Greens. So everything switched up again.
For those pre-polling votes coming in a bit
we
later.
lost.
A disastrous night, it's fair to say, for the Liberal Party. Let's look to the top of the party. I'm assuming that there would be changes to the top.
I obviously haven't communicated with Matthew tonight, but we're just holding out. And I understand what we're facing, but we still haven't had that 50% dump. And
At what point do you start having those conversations then, John Pesutto?
Oh, look, we do need to see where things land. These are very important decisions about the future of the party. If what we're seeing comes to pass, then there'll obviously need to be some discussions. But what I'm just very conscious of, and I'm not trying to, ignore what we're seeing come through, is that the reports we were getting throughout the fortnight of pre-poll were positive, and you always have to discount that because we always see what we want to see to some extent as candidates and members, but it was exceedingly positive across the board. So I'm just awaiting the results of those pre-polls because we have traditionally done pretty well in pre-poll.
As Anthony sees it, though, with the pre-polls, he can't see it being any other result, even with the pre-polls.
And he may be right. He may be right. But I just really want to await that before we look further and make some broader statements.
Anthony Green's never wrong, John Pesutto, as we know.
I'm not taking you.
No, let's get serious. This is a rout. This is a rout. You got, 52 seats for the Labor Party. That's up for 6 seats. Surely Matthew Guy steps down as leader at the very least tonight.
It's a matter for the party room and the party room that will exist in the coming week to make that decision as to what happens.
And in normal circumstances, you have been touted as a leadership contender, but as we've just seen, you're on the verge of potentially losing your seat as well. Where does the Liberal Party go next?
Well, I think it's a good question. If all this comes to pass, as we're seeing it unfold, then the party room will have to get together and decide on a course forward. Now, I don't know whether, Matthew will want to be a part of that or not. He may wish to. He's left that open. But the party will obviously need... I'm not... Look, I get it. This is not a great side of the table to be on. And if Jill or John want to swap seats, I'd be more than happy to.
But, very happy where we are. Very happy where we are.
Jane Hume, bringing you in, let's look at the organisation. Would you like to see accountability there based on this awful result, starting at the very top, Michael Kroger, the president?
Well,
Could he reconsider his position?
Well, he's up for election anyway in the middle of next year.
This won't help his chances, surely.
As is the whole executive, as is the state council, as is the state assembly. So, I think that there will be people that will want to see some changes in strategy and changes in direction, certainly.
And personnel.
Well, I think that's sort of par for the course. But I do think it's we shouldn't read the entrails until we've fully gutted the chicken here, don't you think?
Oh, the chicken's pretty well and truly gutted.
It's looking a bit cooked.
The chicken is deep fried in a KFC box, I think. But having said that, I think, sorry, I forgot about Brian's, but the one caution, I suppose, to our enthusiasm is obviously on the pre-poll trend. Some of our scrutineers are saying that the swing to us on pre-poll trend is not as strong as it is on the booths that they are counting today. So, that's, I suppose, a word of caution for all of us.
Can you see any scenario there if the pre-polls went overwhelmingly in the Liberal Party's favour of that tally up now to 55, Anthony is giving to your side being wound back to anywhere below 45?
I think we're on a pretty good wicket tonight, but it's not my role or obligation or honour to, really kind of make projections about that in terms of, claiming victory. That's really the prerogative of the leaders to do so and to claim concession. I do think, as I said, this swing that we are seeing out in the east is quite extraordinary. One of the interesting things during the campaign, I think it was a real mistake for the Liberal Party to go essentially the state government's memorandum of understanding with China. I think that's probably had a very negative impact in the Chinese community. So I think there's some,
There was a fair bit of unwanted secrecy, though, from Daniel Andrews.
Well, no, the agreement was released, and I mean, John, you might have some comments as a person that is very involved in exploring the important export and import opportunities with China, but I think that's cost them.
I think it's an interesting issue. I mean, as you know, I'm National President of Australia-China Business Council, but so there was nothing new about this memorandum that the states signed. I mean, the states signed thousands of memorandums with countries overseas. Dick Hamer signed one back in 1979 with our sister state. with Jiangsu province. But the Liberal Party did attack that, very, very strongly. And there was a push back, I think, by the Chinese community. It will be interesting if you see that, because it's a stigmatisation of the Chinese community. The 1.4 million Australians who are Chinese, and they know that there are sometimes issues between governments, but they don't like being painted as anti-Australian. They just don't like that stigmatisation. And so I think, Box Hill is an interesting seat to watch, where there is quite a substantial Chinese population. It's mainland Chinese, it's Hong Kong Chinese, Singapore Chinese, and ditto Burwood. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in those seats tonight.
And
just one other point, if I may. I think what's interesting tonight is Jill's made the point that the pre-polls may not be showing the same momentum, the same swing as the... So what is it that has gathered such momentum for Labor just really in the last week? And I take Jill's point. It's been a sound government, and as I said earlier, it's been a very strong campaign, so nothing's happened overnight. But I think I think that's an interesting question to think through. What is it that's given such momentum? You're seeing such big numbers being cast on polling day. I think the law and order campaign has clearly, demonstrably failed. I'm not trying to make a party political point, but I just think if you look at that, it's just failed, And I think the focus on cost of living, which Daniel had strongly, the free TAFE, the solar cells, as I mentioned, cost of living is an important issue. Federal Labor's energy policy that they got out on Wednesday, which was tackling cost of living and people's aspiration for cleaner and greener energy. I think that probably helped as well. So there's a lot of factors put a lot of wind in the sails, I think.
OK, let's revisit those southeast rail seats that were vital in this election, Rich.
These are the seats that have just defined government for the last two elections. So I think we're going to start in Bentley at the top of the Frankston line, if you like, where Nick Stakos is defending off Asher Judah. Anthony?
Well, look, the fact that we're talking about eastern suburbs tells you that there's not much to see going on in Bentley, in the southeast rail. Nick Stakos is on 52.4% of the vote, with more than a third counted. The Liberals on 31.5%. I mean, there's been a first preference shift of 12% in that electorate. So this will be an easy victory for the Labor Party. It's an 11.9% swing after preferences. So we're saying Nick Stakos has easily been re-elected as the member for Bentley. So that is quite a dramatic swing. And for all the talk of the nip and tuck fights in the Frankston line, rail line, it's been nothing like that. This has been a bloodbath down on the southeast rail by the look of it.
Well, let's have a look if that continues further down. Mordialloc, which is the next seat along. Tim Richardson defending against the local councillor, Jeff Gledhill.
Well, we're seeing the same trend here at this stage. Tim Richardson, it's a lower count, this one, only 11%, but he's above 50%. Jeff Gledhill is on 29. The Greens are on 8. If we look at the two-party preferred prediction we've got here, we're saying there's an 8.6% swing going on here, and that the Labor Party will easily hold that with a double-digit margin potentially by the end of this election. So Tim Richardson has been returned as the member for Mordialloc. So there's the second of those Frankston line seats which has been emphatically won by Labor.
Next stop is Carrum, where Sonia Kilkenny is up against Donna Bauer, who actually held the seat between 2010 and 2014 for the Liberal Party.
And there's no tight tussle this time. Sonia Kilkenny, it's only a 6.6% counted. I can tell you it's Carrum, Chelsea Central and Seaford North, which are better booths for the Labor Party than some other ones. But on those numbers, Sonia Kilkenny is well ahead. We're seeing a big shift on first preferences, which is turning into an 8.6% swing. Now, all these swings that we're showing here are predicting. We'll go on to look at the prediction here. It's saying that Sonia Kilkenny is re-elected. All these swings are factoring in the postal vote trend for last time. If the trend, which was about 2% in Carrum to the Liberal Party, is repeated this time, it will be an 8.6% swing. So to turn around that, then the trend on the postals and the pre-polls has to be massively in favour of the Liberal Party compared to last time. So Carrum, unless something dramatic happens with the rest of the count, look, the Labor vote's over 50% there.
We go to Frankston now, which is one of the most marginal seats in the state. Paul Edbrook, a former firefighter and teacher, up against Michael Lamb, who's a local police officer.
Well, it's not doubtful after tonight, because Michael Lamb is well ahead. We've got a quarter of the vote. Paul Edbrook is well ahead. We've got a quarter of the vote counted. He's on 48.7. Michael Lamb's on 31%. We've got a preference count in 4 polling places, and that's indicating a swing of 9.4% to Labor. and Labor will go on to hold Frankston on those numbers again. The first preferences are based on 12 of the 19 counting centres, and the two candidate preferred swings based on 4. So everything adds up there to an easy Labor victory.
And we move further out into Melbourne's booming southeast to the seat of Bass, which also includes Phillip Island. Brian Painter defending against Jordan Crugnale.
Now, what we've got here is that the Labor Party is ahead on first preferences, 40.8 to 39.3. There's 5 and 6% with some other candidates there. At this stage, we've got a preference. That's a preference. First preferences in 17 of the 26 counting centres. These are all the rural ones. These aren't the ones closer to Pakenham and Cranbourne. And the swing there is 11.5% in the 9 polling places where we've got counts. Still to come are Clyde, Coronella, Pakenham, Lakeside, Pakenham, Springs. So all the big ones to come, and that's a dramatic swing in Bass.
And finally, Cranbourne, which is a seat where Labor has no incumbent MP. Pauline Richards is contesting for the party against Anne-Marie Hermans for the Liberal Party.
The change on first preferences is 10%. So that's quite a dramatic swing in Cranbourne. So all those thoughts about those 6 seats along the southeast line, they've been superfluous because the swing is elsewhere as well.
Anthony Green, thank you very much. John Pizzuto, does it surprise you in any way that the contest really wasn't in those Sandbelt seats? As it turns out, the Liberal Party should have been spending all those dollars, all those resources in safer seats in the eastern suburbs.
It's certainly looking that way, and I'm certainly picking up from some of our people that there's certainly the swing against us in outer and rural seats is less than certainly with the what seemed to be early and pretty fierce swings in inner east. Yeah.
Disappointing night all around.
Certainly waiting for some good news.
Yeah, but do you see any glimmer of hope in any seats? Jane Hume, bringing you in
I
here
do,
as well.
yes. I'm hearing that Bayswater perhaps is a little bit tighter than we originally thought, that with 2 booths left to count, Hardy Victoria is only behind, I think, by 366 votes, and there's still 2 booths and 3,000 postals to count.
And what information are you guys getting?
Look, things are going, very, very well. I would again add that caution that both on the pre-poll and the postals, we, often assume that there's going to be an older demographic, so the power of the swing towards us may abate. But again, to hear the Liberal Party reaching for joy around perhaps winning Bayswater, I think is just an incredible insight to what a significantly different parliament that we might be looking at, and what a night of crossroads of existentialism that I think the Liberal Party are hitting tonight.
There's the grab.
Let's go to the Liberal Party's most marginal seat now, Ripon in Western Victoria, sitting to the west of Ballarat and Bendigo. We're joined by Sarah DeSantis, the Labor candidate, who is having a very good night there indeed. Sarah.
How are you?
Congratulations to you. Let's just go quickly to Anthony, just to get a little snapshot of what's going on in Ripon.
What we're seeing, this is to the west of Bendigo and Ballarat, and I well remember this from 1999, talking to John Brumby on our panel, asking him to double-check my swing. He remembers as well. Louise Staley on 39.7, Sarah DeSantis on 37.6. We've got a Shooters candidate, Justice Party, various other candidates. We actually have a preference count in 15 of the 46 polling places. And when we factor that in to produce a swing, we're seeing a swing of 1.6% to Labor. It has Labor ahead, but we're not calling it yet. It's too close to call. But that's with half of the polling places on first preferences and 15 of the 46. I'd point out this electorate has one of the highest postal votes in the state, and I think the lowest pre-poll vote state in the state.
So Sarah DeSantis joins us now. And Sarah, you and Louise Staley, the sitting Liberal member, have been working very hard at it for the whole campaign. You must be very happy with tonight's result.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Well, we have worked tirelessly as a party for 4 years to regain this seat, and I've been, I suppose, endorsed since November, and I've spent not one day out and about just trying my best to get out and meet everyone in Ripon and do the very best we can to retain this seat or regain it.
Sarah, it's Richard Willingham here. How do you get out to such a vast electorate, or do you target certain areas to try and make every vote count?
No, I've actually been driving quite a bit, so nothing under 350 k's a day effectively, and sometimes up to 800 kilometres a day to try and get out to as many events and to as many communities as I can, so that I can give the feedback into Parliament about what we need in our communities, and so that our election bids would resonate with the community and they would have high value.
It looks like a very close race in Ripon, one that may take a while to come through. Why do you think that the swing hasn't been as big towards Labor in rural seats like yours that we're seeing across Melbourne?
Well, it's a pretty complicated seat. There was a redistribution in 2014, so we inherited some parts. Some communities that Labor's never held, so it makes it a very interesting seat indeed. So it's not traditionally Labor.
And are you confident that you'll get some preferences from those minor parties that are running? That's quite a field, I think, Justice Party and the Greens and the Shooters and Fishers and Farmers.
No, there's very few preferences that we will get on the ballot cards if people choose to follow the ballot cards. But again, I'm not sure whether this electorate is one that will do that. I think people will make up their own mind. They certainly did on pre-poll, and they certainly have today. They've been pretty steadfast about how they're going to vote.
And so when do you think you might get a result tonight? Are you calling it yet?
No, not at all. That's your job.
No, it's Anthony's job.
It's Anthony's job. Thanks for your time, Sarah.
Well done, Sarah.
No worries.